Tonight we begin in the low, silent ruins of Eridu, where the desert wind moves over broken brick and the old marshland sleeps beneath dust. In the early 20th century, archaeologists working in southern Mesopotamia uncovered temple levels stacked upon one another, each one older than the last. Scholars from major museums and universities have long treated Eridu as one of the earlier sacred cities in Sumerian memory. The site was linked with Enki, lord of wisdom, fresh water, craft, and hidden counsel. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the night settles around you, write your location and your local time below. It is strangely comforting, perhaps, to know that others are listening in darkness too. You're standing now at the edge of an ancient mound. The air is warm. The ground is pale, somewhere beyond the ruined city. Old river channels once wandered through reed beds, fish pools and shining mud. The land does not look powerful at first. It looks tired, almost forgotten. Yet beneath your feet lie the remains of a city that Sumerian tradition placed at the beginning of ordered life. Eridu was not merely a place on a map. It was a memory shaped in clay. It was a sacred name carried through lists, hymns, temple rituals, and stories repeated by scribes under lamplight. Records confirm that southern Mesopotamia held some of the world's earliest urban settlements, and Eridu belonged to that ancient landscape of canals, shrines, cattle, grain, and kingship. Archaeologists have found evidence of repeated temple rebuilding there, layer upon layer, as if each generation refused to let the place vanish. You can almost hear the soft scrape of a trowel against baked earth. A worker kneels beside a wall that has not seen daylight for thousands of years. The bricks are small and hand-formed. They hold the print of human labour. Their edges have softened with time, but they still keep the outline of intention. Someone once laid them down with care. Someone believed this place mattered, and at the heart of that belief stood Enki. He was not the loudest god in the Mesopotamian divine world. He was not simply a storm in the sky or a throne above the clouds. Enki belonged to the deep places, to fresh water under the ground, to hidden knowledge moving quietly beneath visible life. His sacred home was the watery depth, often imagined beneath the earth, where sweet water rose to feed wells, rivers, and marshes, to farming people in a dry and dangerous land. That was not a small thing. Water was survival. Water was permission to continue. So when the stories say that Enki lived below, you do not need to imagine something childish. You may picture instead an ancient way of describing the unseen system that made civilization possible. Beneath the dust, there was water. Beneath the field, there was life. Beneath the official story, perhaps there was another story. That is where the mystery begins. The title speaks of an erased Sumerian script, and already the idea feels uneasy, not because one tablet has been found saying plainly that Enki departed. Ancient evidence rarely behaves so politely. Clay breaks, lines vanish, names are copied poorly, whole archives are scattered by conquest, fire, flood, neglect, and the honest clumsiness of time. What remains is often a sentence with its heart missing. Still, the gaps matter. In the British Museum, the Louvre, the University of Pennsylvania collections, and many other archives, thousands of cuneiform tablets preserve fragments of Sumerian and later Mesopotamian thought. Some are grand myths, some are temple accounts, some are school exercises from students who probably sighed into their clay like children everywhere. Gentle sarcasm belongs here, because apparently homework is older than most empires, even in the oldest cities. Someone was correcting it here. Some of the lines. Yet among these tablets, said divine stories often survive in pieces. A god speaks, then the next part is broken. A city is named. Then the edge of the tablet is gone, a ritual is described, but the conclusion has fallen away. Scholars at Oxford, Yale, Chicago, and other centres of ancient Near Eastern study continue to debate how much these missing spaces are accidental damage and how much reflects the choices of scribes who copied, reshaped, or ignored older traditions. The debate remains open. Some researchers see Enki's changing role as part of normal religious development. Gods merged, names shifted, and local traditions were absorbed into larger political worlds. Others wonder whether certain older myths were softened as a result as rival priesthoods gained power. This is not proof of a hidden conspiracy. It is more subtle than that. It is the slow pressure of culture deciding what deserves to be remembered. You look again across Eridu. The sun is low now, and the mound throws a long shadow. The silence has weight. You can smell dry soil, a faint bitterness of reeds imagined in the distance, and the mineral breath of ancient mud. A temple once stood here, raised and rebuilt through centuries. Inside it, offerings may have been placed for Enki, bowls, fish, grain, and carefully spoken words may have crossed the threshold. The old shrine would have felt cool compared with the open heat. Feet would have moved across packed floors. Priests would have known the rhythm of ritual. Worshippers might have entered with worry in their bodies, asking for water, fertility, protection, or a favourable sign. The god of wisdom was not distant in a philosophical sense. He touched irrigation channels. He touched craft. He touched the cleverness needed to survive. That makes his possible departure feel stranger. For a god of thunder, absence might mean a clear sky. For a war god, absence might mean peace or defeat. But for Enki, absence would be harder to notice at first. Wells would still fill, reeds would still grow, craftsmen would still shape wood, copper, and clay. The world would continue, and yet something beneath it might have withdrawn. A quirky tradition lingers at the edge of Mesopotamian myth. Enki is sometimes linked with trickster wisdom, with clever solutions that bend rules without openly breaking them. He does not always confront power directly. He advises, redirects, whispers, arranges. He can look almost like the divine patron of loopholes, which is rather comforting unless you are the authority being outsmarted. That trickster quality matters because an erased departure would not need to be announced. It might be hidden in a changed hymn, a damaged tablet, a renamed shrine, or a story where Enki becomes less central than he once was. The departure could be theological, it could be political, it could be literary, or it could be simply the feeling left when a civilization forgets how to read its own oldest memory. You are not asked to believe too quickly. Sleep does not need certainty. It needs atmosphere, pattern, and the slow turning of thought. So you stand with the mound beneath your feet and let the first clue settle. Eridu is real. Its sacred layers are real. Enki's association with water, wisdom, and the deep is preserved in ancient tradition. The missing pieces are real too. The strange part is not that the past has gaps. The strange part is how often the gaps gather around beginnings. A first city, a first shrine, a god beneath the waters, a tradition that says order began here, then broken tablets, altered names, and a divine presence that seems to recede as later cultures rise above it. Perhaps Enki did not depart in a single moment. Perhaps he sank slowly into the structure of memory itself, becoming less a figure on the surface and more a current underneath. The evening darkens, the bricks lose their colour, the old marsh beyond the city becomes a sheet of shadow in your mind. You imagine water moving somewhere below, patient and unseen. It touches roots, it cools clay, it keeps secrets without effort. And in that quiet, the erased script is not yet a document. It is a feeling. It is the sense that something once stood at the centre of the earlier story and then moved just beyond the edge of the tablet. You remain at Eridu a little longer, The wind lowers, the dust settles. The first hidden line waits beneath the night. You move downward now, not through stone steps, but through an idea. It is an ancient idea, older than many temples, older than most royal names, older than the careful borders drawn by later kings beneath the visible earth. The Sumerians imagined a hidden reservoir of sweet water, not seawater, not bitter water, but the fresh and life-giving depth that rose through wells and fed the fields. This was the realm of Enki. Your mind drifts beneath the cracked ground of southern Mesopotamia, where heat presses on the plain and the horizon trembles. Above, the world is bright, dry, and exposed. Below, everything changes. The air becomes cool in the imagination. The walls shine with dampness. You hear the slow sound of unseen water moving through darkness, touching roots, clay, and buried foundations. For the Sumerians, water was not a background detail. It was the difference between a settlement and an empty plain. Their cities grew in a land where rivers shifted, floods came unpredictably, and irrigation demanded constant attention. Researchers at major universities studying early Mesopotamia have long emphasized how water management shaped urban life in the region. Canals, fields, levees, and reservoirs were not just practical tools, they were the bones of civilization. So when Enki is described as Lord of the Deep Waters, you are not meeting a decorative myth, you are meeting a divine expression of survival. He is wisdom because water requires wisdom. He is craft because canals require craft. He is magic because the sudden appearance of fresh water from below must have felt, to ancient hands, like a secret spoken by the earth itself. The Sumerian word often associated with this deep watery realm carries the idea of a subterranean source, a hidden abundance. Later traditions would preserve similar ideas under different names, reshaping them as languages and empires changed. Yet the central image remains strangely calm. Under the dust, there is water. Under disorder, there is design. Under human noise, there is a silence that knows more than it says. You stand beside an ancient well in your imagination. The rim is worn smooth by ropes and palms. Someone has leaned over it at dawn, listening for the drop of a vessel into blackness. The rope scratches, the bucket turns, then comes the soft, heavy sound of water received from below. It is ordinary, it is sacred. It is also a little unsettling, because the gift rises from a place no one can fully see. That is Enki's nature. He is not simply wise because he knows answers. He is wise because his knowledge is hidden before it is useful. He belongs to the deep grammar of things, to the mechanisms beneath appearances. He understands how a city is made, how a ritual works, how a human body may be formed from earth and breath, how a command may be obeyed while still being quietly redirected. He is the calm intelligence that survives inside systems. The mainstream historical fact is simple and powerful. Sumerian literature repeatedly connects Enki with wisdom, water, creation, and the arts of civilized life. In myths such as those concerning the ordering of the world, he assigns roles, releases abundance, and establishes patterns by which the world can function. Learned scholars at institutions such as Yale and the University of Chicago have treated these traditions as essential windows into how early Mesopotamians imagined a divine order. Yet the story does not sit still. A quirky fringe tidbit follows Enki like a small fish in dark water. Some modern alternative writers have claimed that his watery realm was not merely mythic, but a symbolic memory of an advanced hidden place, perhaps even an underground station of beings who guided early humanity. That is not mainstream archaeology, and you should let it remain at the edge of the lamp. Still, fringe ideas sometimes reveal what the old myths make people feel. They feel that Enki is not entirely on the surface. The feeling is understandable, He is a god of thresholds, between fresh water and dry land, between command and cleverness, between divine plan and human survival, between what is spoken in the open and what is murmured behind a reed wall. If a story about his departure was ever lost, softened, or transformed, it would fit his character almost too well. Enki does not vanish like a star falling. He withdraws like water sinking into sand. You listen now to the imagined temple at night. Oil lamps tremble, reed mats breathe a faint, grassy scent. A priest's hand passes over a bowl of water, and the surface catches a small orange light. In such a room, theology would not feel abstract. It would feel cool against the fingers. It would smell of clay, smoke, and river mud. A spoken formula might ripple across the bowl and vanish. The scholarly debate remains delicate. Some historians argue that Enki's watery home reflects practical dependence on groundwater and irrigation in southern Mesopotamia. Others suggest the image is also cosmological, placing fresh water within a larger sacred map of heaven, earth, and underworld. A further question stays open among specialists. How far can myths be used to reconstruct social memory without turning poetry into false history? It is a fair caution. Ancient myth does not behave like a government report. It does not line up neatly, sign its name, and provide a date. It folds memory into symbol. It lets landscapes speak as persons. It turns anxiety about flood, drought, and kingship into divine conversations. To read it well, you must move slowly. Too much certainty breaks it. Too little curiosity leaves it unopened. So you let the water guide you. The deep realm of Enki may be understood as a mythic place, but it also resembles an invisible infrastructure. Cities depend on things that are not always seen. A canal is visible, but planning is not. A temple is visible, but authority is not. A tablet is visible, but the teacher's voice behind it is gone. Oh. In the same way, Enki's presence under the world suggests that civilization rests on hidden arrangements. There is comfort in this. There is unease too, because when a civilization believes its wisdom comes from below, it also admits that the surface is incomplete. Kings may stand on platforms, but they do not know everything. Priests may recite hymns, but they inherit older formulas. Scribes may copy a myth, but the first telling has already disappeared into shadow. The deeper source remains beyond reach, giving and withholding at once. You may picture Enki seated in a chamber beneath the waters, not as a creature of noise, but as a patient figure surrounded by flowing brightness. Around him are plans, measures, tools, and laws that are not yet laws. Fish move through the edges of the vision. Reeds sway without wind. The whole chamber seems less like a palace and more like a mind. Perhaps that is why the idea of departure feels so difficult. How does wisdom leave? How does water abandon the ground? How does a hidden source announce that it has withdrawn? Maybe it does not announce anything. Maybe wells still open, canals still shine, and scribes still press signs into clay. Maybe people continue repeating Enki's name, while slowly forgetting the older shape of his presence. A god of the deep can remain in ritual, while departing from meaning. He can survive as a title, a symbol, a polite remnant. The water remains, but the voice beneath it grows faint. Your ears catch a low drip in the darkness, then another. The sound is small, steady, and almost kind, somewhere far above. The desert cools beneath the stars. Somewhere below, the imagined waters hold their secrets with perfect patience. And you understand, gently, that Enki's realm is not merely a place under the earth. It is the hidden level of every old story, where the most important things move quietly for you, and where departure may look exactly like silence. The clay is in your hands now, cool at first, then slowly warming beneath your fingers. It is only a small tablet, no larger than a modern hand, yet it carries the weight of a vanished room. Along its surface, wedge-shaped signs press into the brown skin of earth, some sharp, some blurred, some lost where the edge has broken away. You notice the damage immediately. A corner is missing, a line ends too soon, a divine name appears. Then the clay fractures into silence. The tablet does not explain itself. It simply waits, with the patience of all things buried too long. This is one of the quiet problems of ancient history. The past does not usually arrive as a complete book. It comes as fragments, receipts, hymns, lists, curses, royal boasts, school exercises, and broken prayers. It comes in pieces dug from ruined houses, temple libraries, palace storerooms, and heaps of discarded clay. Many tablets were never meant to become immortal. They were ordinary objects used, stored, forgotten, and accidentally preserved. Records from Mesopotamian archaeology confirm that cuneiform tablets survived because clay, once dried or fired, could endure when softer materials disappeared. Papyrus decayed, wood rotted, leather vanished. Clay remained, stubborn as an old accountant. Very charming, really, that one of humanity's greatest archives survived because bureaucracy refused to die. Still, survival is uneven. Some tablets were baked hard by ancient fires when cities burned. Others stayed fragile, crumbling when touched. Some were copied by careful scribes over centuries, while others existed in only one damaged version. A myth might be known from several tablets, but each tablet may carry different wording, omissions, or local preferences, so the ancient story does not stand before you like a statue. It appears like a face glimpsed through water. Your eyes move over the signs. A trained Assyriologist could read them, but even an expert would pause at the broken spaces. They might write that a certain number of lines are missing. They might mark uncertainty with cautious brackets. They might suggest a restoration, then admit that another reading is possible. The scholar's humility becomes part of the tablet. It has to. The mainstream historical fact is clear. Thousands of Sumerian and Akkadian tablets have been recovered from Mesopotamian sites, and many important myths survive only in fragmentary copies. Scholars at universities such as Pennsylvania, Chicago, and Oxford have spent generations reconstructing these texts through comparison, grammar, scribal habits, and archaeological context. Their work is slow, exacting, and often less dramatic than the stories themselves. But the drama hides inside the caution. A missing line is not empty to the imagination. It is a doorway. It asks what once stood there, and why its absence feels so sharp. When a tablet breaks during a list of offerings, you may shrug gently and continue. When it breaks during a divine speech, the silence becomes heavier. When it breaks, just as a god makes a decision, the room seems to lean closer. You see a scribe at work by lamplight. He sits cross-legged on a reed mat, holding a tablet in one palm and a stylus in the other. The stylus is cut from reed, its end shaped to press angled marks into damp clay. The room smells of clay, lamp oil, and human concentration. Outside, sandals scrape across a courtyard. Inside, the scribe breathes through his nose and copies a line from an older tablet. Perhaps he is careful. Perhaps he's bored. Perhaps the master tablet in front of him is already damaged, and he must guess. He may leave a gap. He may smooth over the problem. He may replace an obscure expression with one his own century understands better. He may decide that a local god deserves more honour than the older version gave. Not villainy, just copying. Just tradition moving through human hands. That is how memory changes. The erased script of Enki's departure may not require a knife scraping clay clean. It may be subtler than vandalism. It may live in the accumulated effect of damage, selection, translation, and theological discomfort. A line not copied, a hymn no longer recited, a local tradition absorbed into a larger system, A watery god made useful, then made safe, then made symbolic. A quirky fringe tidbit drifts beside this thought. Some modern enthusiasts claim that damaged Sumerian tablets conceal deliberately suppressed accounts of divine beings leaving the earth. They point to broken passages and ask whether the missing clay once held forbidden knowledge. Professional historians do not accept such claims without evidence. Quite reasonably, clay cannot confess what it no longer carries. Still, the fascination itself reveals something important. People feel via the wounds in this record. You turn the tablet slightly, in the low light. The signs cast tiny shadows. Each wedge is both mark and valley. The writing is physical in a way modern letters often are not. You can almost feel the pressure of the scribe's hand. Hesitation before a difficult sign, the confidence of a familiar phrase. Cuneiform is not ink floating on a page. It is language carved into touch, and touch can be interrupted. The scholarly debate remains open in a careful, disciplined way. Some specialists argue that variant myths mainly reflect normal scribal transmission across different schools and cities. Others emphasize the role of political change, temple rivalry, and language shift in shaping which divine stories survived. A quieter question persists when a text is broken. How much restoration becomes scholarship, and how much becomes desire? That question matters here. You are not hunting for a single forbidden sentence. You are listening for the pattern of absence around Enki. He appears in stories as counselor, creator, rescuer, arranger of destinies, and guardian of deep knowledge. Yet the older the world becomes in the imagination, the more fragile the record becomes in your hands. Beginnings are the places where evidence thins, myth thickens, and certainty walks more slowly. A tablet may preserve a god's title without preserving the story that gave it force. It may keep a ritual instruction while losing the mythic reason behind it. It may name Enki's shrine, his waters, his wisdom, and his gifts, while leaving unspoken whether there was ever a moment when his presence changed. The result is not a clean mystery. It is a weathered one. You hear rain that never reaches the desert floor. You hear a stylus tapping lightly against clay. You hear the scribe's teacher correcting a sign. Perhaps with the weary patience of someone who has corrected the same mistake since sunrise. Ancient education was not always grand. Sometimes civilization is just a tired instructor saying, "No, that wedge goes deeper." The thought is oddly tender. These tablets were copied by people, not by myth itself. Their hands carried the gods forward. Their mistakes, preferences, loyalties, and fears entered the archive. If Enki's departure was remembered anywhere, it would have needed human hands to survive. And human hands are mortal. They tremble. They forget. They obey patrons. They avoid trouble. They also preserve wonders by accident. The broken tablet rests in your palm. Its smoothness is not blank. It is textured. It has edges, pressure marks, mineral stains, and the faint curve of a lost sentence. You do not force it to speak. You let it remain incomplete. Because incompleteness is also evidence. It tells you that the ancient world was not delivered whole. It must be reconstructed from shards, each one carrying both knowledge and refusal. The missing lines do not prove Enki's departure. They do not disprove it either. They simply create the conditions in which such a departure could fade, passing from sacred account into hint, from hint into absence, from absence into a feeling beneath the clay. The lamp grows lower. The scribe sets down his stylus. The tablet dries in the dark, keeping what it can, losing what it must. Somewhere in the broken edge, a god may have spoken, somewhere beyond the last readable sign. The story pauses, and you remain with that pause. The ancient list opens like a door cut into darkness. You do not enter a city first. You enter a sequence of names, reigns, and impossible spans of time, each pressed into clay with the calm seriousness of official memory. Kings rule for thousands of years. Cities rise like constellations along the plain. Then a flood comes, and the whole pattern breaks. This is not how modern history usually speaks. It does not measure kings in lifetimes that stretch beyond reason. It does not place time in such vast dreamlike blocks. Yet the Sumerian king list does exactly that, arranging power into a sacred rhythm. Kingship descends from heaven, it rests in one city, then moves to another. Human authority becomes something received, transferred, interrupted, and restored. You are not standing in a palace. You are standing inside an ancient concept of legitimacy. The air smells of baked clay and dry reeds. A scribe leans close to his tablet, not merely recording rulers, but shaping the memory of order itself. He is telling his world where power came from. He is also telling it what came before ordinary time here. Long before recorded history, the list suggests there were cities already chosen. Eridu appears at the beginning in several versions of this tradition, receiving kingship before other cities. That placement matters, even when the numbers around it feel symbolic rather than literal. The mainstream historical fact is that the Sumerian king list preserves a major Mesopotamian attempt to organize dynastic memory, combining real cities, legendary rulers, and theological ideas about authority. Scholars at leading institutions such as Oxford and the University of Pennsylvania study it as both historical source and ideological text. That double nature is important. The list is not a simple record of facts. It is also a claim about the shape of the world. Kingship is not invented by people in a meeting, because that would be much too ordinary for ancient royal propaganda. No, kingship descends from heaven, which is certainly more impressive on a royal inscription. Gentle sarcasm aside, the idea gave power a sacred origin. Rule was not merely administration, it was participation in a cosmic pattern. The first rulers in the list belong to the age before the flood. Their reigns are enormous. Tens of thousands of years pass in the space of a few lines. To the modern mind, such numbers may seem absurd, yet ancient numbers often carry symbolic weight. They magnify importance. They widen the atmosphere around the past. They tell you that the earliest time was not like your time. It was deeper. You picture the first cities as lights placed along a black plain. Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sipa, Shurapak. Their names sound like stones dropped into water. Some were real places, known from archaeology or later tradition. Others feel distant, half-lit, reachable only through textual memory. Each receives kingship, holds it for a span beyond ordinary imagination, then passes it onward. Here the hidden timeline begins to form. Not with certainty, not with a clean map. It forms as a rhythm descent, rain, transfer, flood, restoration. Civilization does not simply develop in a straight line. In this tradition, it arrives from above, settles among humans, and moves according to a plan larger than any one city. Human history begins to look like a late chapter in a longer, stranger arrangement. You feel the night air over the plain. A distant animal calls from the marsh. The stars appear sharp above the low horizon. In such a sky, the idea of kingship descending from heaven may not feel extravagant. It may feel almost natural. The heavens move with order. The rivers move with danger between them. Fragile human cities ask why authority exists at all. A quirky fringe tidbit clings to these long reigns. Some modern theorists have treated the enormous numbers as evidence of non-human rulers, lost advanced beings, or memories of ancient visitors. Mainstream historians read the list more cautiously, understanding the numbers through symbolism, royal ideology, and mythic time. Still, the old exaggeration does its work. It makes the beginning feel inhumanly large. That is the power of the list. It does not say. People gradually organized villages into towns. It says, kingship came down. The phrase is not quiet in its meaning. Even when read softly, something is imagined as arriving, something is granted, something stands behind human rule before humans fully understand it. This is where Enki's shadow becomes interesting, because Eridu, his city, is placed near the start of ordered kingship. You do not need to force the connection, let it breathe. Eridu is the city of deep waters and ancient wisdom. The king list places it at the beginning of royal order. Enki is not always the central figure in the list itself, but his sacred city carries his atmosphere into the structure. A city associated with hidden knowledge becomes the first vessel of kingship. A watery shrine stands near the opening of political time. Beneath the royal names, a deeper current moves. The scholarly debate remains active. Some researchers treat the earliest section of the king list as mythic construction, designed to connect later dynasties with sacred beginnings. Others ask whether it preserves faint memories of early political centres whose actual histories are largely lost. A third problem continues to trouble interpretation. How should historians separate logical arrangement from inherited tradition when both are pressed into the same clay? The tablet does not answer kindly. It gives a pattern instead. Before the flood, cities rule for ages. Then the flood sweeps over the old arrangement. Afterward, kingship descends again. This creates a division in time. There is the world before catastrophe and the world that follows. The first is vast, luminous, and difficult to verify. The second feels closer, though still wrapped in legend. You are listening at the seam. The flood is not yet the storm in your ears. It is only the line in the list where memory changes texture. Before it, rains are immense. After it, the numbers become less impossible, though still often grand. This narrowing of time feels almost like waking. Mythic darkness gives way to historical dawn, yet the dawn keeps traces of the night. Perhaps that is how ancient societies handled beginnings. They knew their cities had foundations, but the first foundation always lay beyond memory. They knew kings ruled, but the first king required an explanation. They knew temples stood, but the first temple seemed too sacred to be merely human, so they placed the origin in a time no longer remembered, where divine order touched the earth and left marks. The marks remain strange. A city at the beginning, a flood at the centre, kingship descending, vanishing, returning, names repeated like low bells. You sense that human beings are not yet the main actors here. They're receivers. They inherit systems. They live inside decisions older than their own stories. Their role is significant, but not primary. This can feel unsettling in a quiet way. Modern people like to imagine humanity as author of its own ascent. The ancient list suggests something different. It suggests that order arrives before explanation, and that humans spend history trying to understand the gift they already hold. Kingship, city life, ritual, and labour all appear as part of a structure that precedes the individual. You walk past the imagined tablets stored in a dim archive. Each one holds names that claim to be more than names. The signs are small, but the time behind them is enormous. Dust gathers along the shelves. A lamp smokes gently, making the room smell of oil and heat. The scribe's hands are stained with clay. He copies the old sequence again. Maybe he believes every number. Maybe he knows the numbers are sacred and symbolic. Maybe that difference does not matter to him as much as it matters to you. His task is not to make the past smaller. His task is to preserve its grandeur, its warning, and its structure. And within that structure, the possibility of Enki's departure becomes less like a single missing event and more like a movement inside sacred time. If kingship can descend, it can withdraw. If divine order can settle in a city, it can move away. If the flood can divide the world, then some presences may belong more to the earlier age than to the later one. The stars continue turning above the dark plain. The list remains open, solemn and incomplete. You hear the soft press of reed into clay, and the beginning of history stretches away from you. Longer than memory, wider than proof. The temple rises in layers beneath your thoughts, one floor resting upon another, one sacred rebuilding covering the old shape below. You stand where the earliest walls of Eridu once gathered themselves from mud brick, and you feel the weight of repetition. A shrine is built, it ages, it is replaced. Another shrine rises over it, slightly altered, slightly higher, still facing the same ancient need. This is not ruins as collapse, this is ruins as memory. Archaeologists who examined Eridu found a remarkable sequence of temple levels, with earlier sacred buildings preserved beneath later ones. The site became famous because its architectural layers showed centuries of ritual continuity. Major research traditions in Mesopotamian archaeology have treated these temple phases as evidence that Eridu remained sacred across long spans of early urban development. The bricks speak softly, but they speak with persistence. You descend through those levels as though sinking through time. The upper remains a younger, more visible, closer to the world of kings whose names can sometimes be placed beside history. Then come older levels, smaller and more modest. The walls narrow, the plans simplify, the temple becomes less monumental but somehow more intimate. You are approaching the first impulse to mark a place as holy. The air is dusty and still. Your fingers brush a brick-stone surface, rough and faintly powdery. You smell old earth, sun-baked clay, and the dry ghost of reed matting. A doorway opens into a room that is no longer there. A platform may have held offerings. A hearth or altar may have marked a ritual centre. Around everything lies the patient silence of a place rebuilt too many times to be accidental. People kept returning. That is the mainstream historical fact resting under the dust. Eridu's temple sequence suggests long-term sacred continuity, from early village phases into the growth of complex Sumerian society. Scholars from major archaeological programs have used the site to discuss how public religion developed alongside settlement hierarchy, craft production, and emerging social organization. A shrine could become the fixed point around which a community slowly learned to become a city. You imagine the earliest visitors. They are not wearing crowns. They are not posing for royal reliefs. They are people with baskets, fish, grain, jars, wool, and anxieties. They come because the waters matter, because the fields matter, because children fall ill, animals wander, canals silt, and the future is always slightly rude. Ancient life, for all its sacred poetry, still had chores. The temple gives those chores a centre. Here, ordinary need becomes ritual, so a bowl of grain is no longer only grain, a fish is no longer only food. Water poured before a divine image becomes an exchange between human uncertainty and hidden order. In such a place, Enki's presence would not feel distant. He would be imagined in the channel. The well, the clever hand, the measured bull, the whispered charm, and the stable rhythm of survival. Yet the layers also suggest concealment. Every rebuilding protects and buries to honour the old shrine. Later builders do not always destroy it completely. They cover it, raise a new floor, build a fresh wall, and continue worship above the sealed remains. The earlier temple becomes a foundation rather than a visible structure. Its sacredness is preserved precisely by being hidden. That is a strange and beautiful habit. It offers a For memory, Enki's departure, if understood as a fading from active presence, might resemble the temple itself, not erased in a single violent act, not denied by every generation, covered, elevated, ritualized, and gradually made inaccessible. The god remains at the foundation, while later structures rise above his oldest meaning. Worship continues, but the first room disappears under new floors. You pause in a corridor that no longer exists. The light is low. Dust hangs in the air like sleeping pollen somewhere. A priest carries a vessel of water. The sound of liquid against clay is quiet, almost private. The temple is not grand yet. It is closer to the ground, closer to need, closer to the nervous beginning of civilization. A quirky fringe tidbit appears at the edge of this sacred architecture. Some enthusiasts have suggested that Eridu's repeated temple rebuilding hides a deliberate ceiling of older knowledge, as though each new level covered a secret chamber of origins. Archaeologists do not need such drama to explain the layers. Temples are often rebuilt because buildings decay, communities grow, and sacred locations attract renewal. Still, the image remains tempting. A holy place is literally buried beneath its own devotion. The scholarly debate can be used with quieter tools. Some researchers emphasize the temple sequence as evidence of emerging institutional religion, where leaders coordinated labor and offerings around a shrine. Others focus on household ritual, local identity, and gradual social complexity, warning against imagining organized priesthood too early. Another conversation asks whether the architectural continuity reflects one stable cult or changing practices, later interpreted as belonging to Enki. The bricks cannot settle the debate alone. They can show rebuilding, they can show plan, alignment, material, and labor. They can show the increasing importance of a sacred place within a settlement. But they cannot easily preserve the tone of a chant, the fear in a worshipper's chest, or the exact moment when a local spirit became a great god of wisdom. Those things move in softer materials. Breath, gesture, memory. You feel the temple as a body. Its floors are slayed over skin. Its walls are bones repaired through generations. Its platforms are organs of offering and return. People enter through doorways, leave gifts, speak requests, and pass back into heat. The building remains, absorbing their hopes without answering in a human voice. This is how sacred places become ancient. They gather repetition until repetition itself feels divine. And yet every repetition changes something. A phrase may be spoken more formally. A vessel may be placed differently. A new authority may decide which hymn belongs. A child who once watched from the doorway becomes the elder correcting another child's gesture. The ritual continues, but the original reason becomes thinner. It does not vanish exactly. It becomes inherited. It becomes what people do because it has always been done. That can be powerful. It can also be dangerous to certain spimeros. For a god like Enki, whose realm lies beneath, the buried shrine is almost too perfect an image. The earliest temple lies underground. The watery god belongs underground. The first meanings lie underground. Each later generation stands above them, supported by them, but unable to see them fully. The sacred past becomes a foundation that no one can walk through without digging. You picture a later priest standing in a newer temple, unaware of the exact outline beneath his feet. He knows the place is ancient. He knows the name of Enki. He knows the formulas, offerings, and calendar. But he may not know the earlier stories once tied to that first mud brick room. Perhaps no one does. The old room has become trust without memory. That phrase settles gently. Trust without memory. Civilizations live by it more often than they admit. You use words whose origins are gone. You walk roads built over older roads. You inherit customs whose first meanings have faded into polite habit. Ancient Eridu did the same, only with gods, canals, and the beginning of urban life. It stood on buried sacredness, and that buriedness gave it authority. So the temple's sleeping layers do not prove a lost departure script. They teach you how such a script could disappear without being hated. It could be covered by reverence. It could be replaced by newer recitations. It could be sealed beneath centuries of proper worship until only the foundation remembered. Night settles over the mound again. The ruined bricks cool. The imagined temple lamp fades to a dull amber point. Beneath the upper floors, older walls rest in complete darkness, holding the shape of rooms no foot can enter. Enki's city keeps its secret quietly, not by locking a door, but by building another floor above it, and under that floor the first shrine sleeps. Above the flat land, the heavens widen into a dark blue bowl. Beneath your feet, the deep waters hold their quiet pressure. Between these two realms lies the human world, filled with walls, fields, animals, smoke, argument, hunger, and ritual. It is here that the divine structure begins to arrange itself, not as a single throne, but as a council. You sense the old pattern forming. In Mesopotamian thought, the gods were not always imagined as solitary powers acting alone. They belonged to families, assemblies, hierarchies, and disputes. Authority moved through conversation, command, persuasion, and sometimes uneasy compromise. The divine world looks strangely like an elevated version of society itself, which is either profound theology or ancient administration wearing a very large hat. At the summit stood Anu, lord of the heavens, remote and luminous. He was connected with the high sky, with the authority that seems distant because it is too far above ordinary reach. Then came Enlil, forceful lord of wind, command, and earthly dominion, often associated with kingship, decree, and the dangerous power of order. And below, or perhaps beside the hidden foundations, was Enki, lord of the deep waters, wisdom, craft, and subtle rescue. Together they form a structure of realms. Heaven above, the living earth between, then the sweet waters beneath. This arrangement is not merely decorative. It gives the universe an architecture. The sky is not empty space. The land is not random soil. The hidden waters are not only geology. Each level belongs to a power, and each power has a role in sustaining the whole. The world becomes a house with several floors, and humanity lives in the noisy middle room. Records from Sumerian and Akkadian literature confirm that divine assemblies played a central role in Mesopotamian myth. Major universities and museums have studied these texts as evidence for how early societies imagined cosmic government. Decisions about creation, kingship, flood, destiny, and punishment often appear not as private thoughts of one god, but as matters brought into divine councils. That council matters for Enki. He is wise, but not always supreme. He is powerful, but often indirect. He does not always command the room. Instead, he listens, interprets, and finds the narrow passage through harsh decrees. His intelligence works within structure. That makes him especially interesting, because departure from such a system need not look like rebellion. It might look like exclusion. It might look like silence in the council chamber. You find yourself in an imagined hall beyond ordinary weather. The floor is polished like wet stone. The air smells faintly of cedar smoke and mineral water. Tall forms gather beneath a ceiling that seems to hold stars without night. No voice is loud. The power here is older than shouting. Decrees are spoken slowly, as though every word becomes weight in the world below. Anu watches from remote height. Enlil stands closer to the storm of rule. Enki sits with the stillness of deep water, eyes lowered, hearing what others miss. Around them are other divine figures, attendants, scribes of destiny, guardians of order, and powers tied to cities, crafts, birth, death, and grain. It is a system, not a crowd. The mainstream historical fact is steady. Mesopotamian religion developed through city-based cults, shared pantheons, and layered traditions in which divine roles shifted across time. Scholars at Yale, Chicago, Oxford, and Pennsylvania have shown how gods could rise in status as cities gained importance, while older figures were reinterpreted through new political and literary settings. Theology did not stand still. It moved with power. This movement leaves traces. When one city becomes dominant, its god may gain prestige. When another fades, its god may remain honoured but less central. The divine council can be read partly as sacred imagination and partly as a reflection of historical relationships between cities and institutions. Heaven, in this sense, remembers politics. Very dignified politics, naturally, but politics all the same. A quirky fringe tidbit shadows the council image. Some modern speculative writers have described the divine assembly almost like a command structure of ancient visitors, assigning territories and managing human labour. Mainstream scholars do not treat such interpretations as evidence-based history. Still, the old texts do portray gods discussing territories, offices, crafts, destinies, and human duties with a surprising bureaucratic calm. That bureaucratic calm is fascinating. The gods are not only emotional beings in these stories, they assign functions, they regulate abundance, they distribute powers known as sacred decrees, the ordered principles that make civilization work. These principles include kingship, priesthood, truth, craft, battle, music, sexuality, justice, and lamentation. In the myths, civilization is not a random invention. It is organized through divine allocation. Enki is often close to these allocations. He understands the mechanisms. He holds or distributes sacred powers. He is not merely clever in a playful sense. His wisdom is structural. He knows where things belong, how they operate, and how they may be redirected when the official decree becomes too severe. That is why he can appear both loyal to divine order and quietly dangerous to it. The scholarly debate remains open around how to interpret these divine roles. Some researchers emphasize theology, arguing that myths express genuine religious visions of cosmic balance. Others emphasize social history, reading the gods as mirrors of temple economies, political alliances, and administrative offices. A further question remains unresolved when ancient texts describe divine councils. Are they preserving old sacred imagination, or are they translating human institutions into heavenly language? The answer may be both. You hear the faint scratch of a celestial scribe. If such a creature may be imagined without becoming ridiculous, a tablet of destinies lies somewhere in the hall, its surface bright, its marks impossible to erase. Decisions made here descend into the human world as flood, harvest, kingship, drought, law, and unexpected mercy. To live below such a council is to live beneath decisions you cannot hear until they become events. And Enki's place in this council creates tension. He is part of the system, but he often softens its edges. When divine authority grows severe, Enki's wisdom seeks a hidden way. When destruction is planned, he finds indirect speech. When humanity is threatened, he preserves a remnant without openly overturning the highest decree. He behaves like someone who knows the rules so well that he can move through them sideways. This makes his possible withdrawal more than a personal absence. If Enki leaves, the council loses influence or recedes from the central memory of the system, then the balance changes. The world becomes more exposed to command without counsel, decree without mitigation, structure without mercy. The deep water still exists, but its advocate grows quieter. You may imagine that shift not as drama, but as atmosphere. In the council hall, one seat remains occupied in name, but the voice from it is heard less often. Decisions proceed more directly. Storm and throne speak with confidence. The deep listens, but the old interventions become rarer. Below, humans continue to plough, pray, and quarrel over boundary stones. Because of course, even under divine government, someone still argues about land. The humour fades gently. For humans, the council's structure explains why life feels ordered and unstable at the same time. There is design, but also conflict. There is wisdom, but it is not always obeyed. There is authority, but it can be harsh. There is water beneath the soil, but drought can still come. The gods themselves are not a single answer. They are a system of tensions. This system also suggests why no clear farewell would be needed for Isis, Enki. A god in council can depart by demotion, by absorption, by silence, by being overwritten in later stories. His realm remains necessary. So his name cannot simply vanish. But his role can be narrowed. His wisdom can be admired while no longer allowed to guide the central decree. You stand quietly beneath the imagined ceiling of stars. No one announces the loss. No tablet reads, "Wisdom has departed." Instead, the council continues. The earth receives decisions. Cities rise. Temples burn and rebuild. Scribes copy older myths, with newer loyalties in their hands. The deep waters make no protest. They do what deep waters do. They remain below, carrying reflection without speech, and in that silence, the structure of the divine world reveals its unsettling beauty. Humanity lives between powers it did not create, beneath heavens it cannot reach, above waters it cannot fully enter, and inside a council whose decisions are remembered only when clay survives. The workshop of creation is quiet at first, not empty, not lifeless, but waiting. You sense clay cooling in shallow bowls, water darkening the dust, and hands preparing to shape what does not yet have a name. In the ancient stories, humanity does not simply appear by accident. Humanity is fashioned, discussed, needed, and placed into a world already crowded with divine purposes. The thought is humbling. You are not beginning with human triumph, you are beginning with divine fatigue, cosmic labour, and the strange problem of work. In several Mesopotamian traditions, human beings are created in connection with service. The gods require offerings, temples, fields, canals, and order. Someone must maintain the divine households. Someone must prepare bread, pour water, tend animals, raise walls, dig channels, keep the rhythm of worship turning. Apparently, even heaven wanted staff. The humour is small, but the idea is not. These creation stories imagine humanity as deeply useful. People are not ornamental. They are not merely spectators in a sacred theatre. They carry burdens that connect earth with the gods. Their labour feeds ritual, and ritual feeds the relationship between visible and invisible worlds. To exist is to be woven into duty. Records from Sumerian and Akkadian literature confirm that Mesopotamian myths often connect human creation with service to the gods. Scholars at major institutions, including Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago, have studied these traditions as reflections of temple economy, social organization, and theological imagination. Creation is not only about where bodies come from, it is also about why communities work. You enter the clay chamber slowly. The floor is damp beneath your bare feet. The scent is mineral, heavy and fresh, like rain striking parched ground. A shallow basin rests near the wall. Into it, earth and water are mixed until the dust becomes something pliable. Clay is humble material. It cracks, stains, and clings under the fingernails. Yet it can become tablet, brick, bowl, figurine, seal, and city. No wonder creation begins there. Enki's role belongs naturally in such a room. He is the lord of sweet water, and clay needs water before it can take form. He is the god of craft, and human bodies are imagined as crafted things. He is wisdom beneath the visible world, and creation requires a design before shape can hold. His presence turns mud into intention. In one major tradition, the gods seek relief from labour, and humanity is formed to take up the work. In another, Enki participates through counsel, cleverness, and the ordering of life. The details shift across texts, languages, and periods, but the atmosphere remains steady. Human beings are made within a system already operating. They arrive as answer, instrument, and risk. You picture the divine figures gathered around the basin. No thunder shakes the room. No golden trumpet announces the birth of mankind, which is probably just as well. The scene is quieter. A command is spoken. A form is pressed. A breath, sign, or sacred quality enters the shaped clay. The fragile creature stirs, half earth and half obligation. A quirky fringed tidbit hovers close to this clay. Some modern speculative writers have treated Mesopotamian creation stories as coded memories of ancient genetic engineering, reading divine craftsmen as technicians rather than gods. Professional historians do not accept that as a historical conclusion, because the evidence belongs to myth, ritual, language, and culture. Still, the ancient image of beings fashioned for labour has a peculiar modern echo. It asks why people have so often felt made for someone else's system. That question is uncomfortable. The scholarly debate remains measured but lively. Some researchers read these myths mainly through temple institutions, where offerings and labour supported divine households. Others emphasize theological anthropology, asking what the stories say about human dignity, dependence, and mortality. Another discussion asks whether creation from clay reflects ordinary craft practice, birth symbolism, or a deeper Mesopotamian idea that civilization itself is shaped from earth. Perhaps all three move together. You look at your own hands in the half-dark. They are capable of tenderness and exhaustion. They can build walls, grind grain, write signs, lift water, soothe a child, strike in anger, and fold in prayer. Ancient myths understand hands. They know that human life is made of doing. Even rest must be earned. Even worship requires preparation. So humanity's role becomes complicated. Created to serve, yes, but not merely enslaved in a crude sense. The servant in a temple world can also be necessary, dangerous, beloved, irritating, and sacred. Humans maintain the connection between gods and earth. Without them, offerings cease. Without them, temples empty. Without them, fields go wild and canals choke with silt. The gods may be higher me, but the system depends on the small creatures below. This dependence gives humanity a strange power. If people were made only to obey, then Enki's interest in them would be simple. But Enki often appears as the god who understands their vulnerability. He sees not only their usefulness, but their fragility. He knows that clay cracks. He knows that labour wears down the body. He knows that a system without mercy eventually damages its own foundation. Wisdom notices what authority ignores. You hear the scrape of a hoe in a field outside the imagined city. The sun is sharp. A worker bends at the canal bank, clearing mud from the channel. Water begins to move again, sluggish at first, then brighter. This work is sacred, though no hymn may be sung while it happens. The canal feeds grain. Grain feeds bodies. Bodies feed temples. Temples feed the divine relationship. Everything returns. It is not glamorous. It is civilization. The creation of humanity in these stories, therefore, reveals an ancient social truth. Cities require labour hidden beneath ceremony. Kings may boast, gods may receive offerings, scribes may list measures of barley. But someone must carry the basket. Someone must stand in the water and repair the bank. Someone must rise before dawn when the air is still mercifully cool. Enki's departure, imagined within this frame, becomes more unsettling. If the god who understood the system's hidden costs grows distant, who remembers the clay, who speaks for the formed creature when councils discuss noise, burden, and obedience, who notices that service can become suffering when order loses compassion, no answer settles fully. You remain in the workshop. The first human form is no longer motionless. Breath enters, eyes open. The creature does not yet understand kingship. Flood, writing, pitet, harvest, illness, marriage, mourning, or taxes, especially taxes. Civilization always finds a way to be charming like that. The creature only exists, damp with beginning, carrying within its body the future weight of cities. The clay remembers the water. That may be Enki's deepest mark on humanity. Not that people are divine in a proud sense, but that they are mixed beings, earth softened by hidden waters. They belong to the surface and the depth. They work in daylight, yet something unseen gives them shape. They obey systems, yet wisdom can stir inside them. They are made for service, but they are not only this. The room grows dimmer, the basin cools. Outside, the ancient land waits for hands to open channels through mud and dust. You feel the tenderness of the myth. Even inside its severity, humanity is not introduced as master of the world. Humanity is introduced as burden bearer, ritual keeper, clay worker, and listener at the edge of divine intention. Perhaps that is why the story still feels close. You too live among systems you did not create. You too inherit work, names, duties, and fears from older arrangements. You too carry water through a world that asks more than it explains, and somewhere in the oldest image of shaped clay. Enki's wisdom remains like moisture inside the form, quiet, necessary, and almost impossible to see. The sound begins softly, almost like life itself. A pestle striking grain, a child crying near a doorway, donkeys complaining in the heat, as donkeys have probably done since the beginning of public inconvenience. A potter's wheel turns, reed doors creak, voices rise from courtyards, canals, workshops, kitchens, and temple yards, until the whole human world becomes a murmur beneath heaven. Then the murmur becomes too much. In one of the most haunting Mesopotamian flood tradition, the gods grow troubled by human noise. The complaint sounds strange to modern ears, almost petty at first. Humanity is loud, so destruction is considered, yet beneath the oddness lies a serious ancient anxiety. Population, labour, settlement, and disorder are all being imagined through sound. Civilization has become audible, and the gods do not like what they hear. You stand in a city before dawn. The air is still cool, but already the first noises gather. Someone drags a basket across a floor. A goat shakes its head, bells lightly clinking. A woman calls across a lane for water. A worker coughs somewhere. A baby begins a thin, determined cry. The city wakes like a living animal, not graceful, not wicked, simply alive. The mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamian flood stories survive in several forms, including Akkadian compositions in which divine irritation at humanity helps lead toward catastrophe. Scholars at institutions such as Yale, Chicago, and Oxford examine these texts as part of a wider ancient Near Eastern tradition of flood memory, divine judgment, and human survival. These are not identical stories, but they share deep concerns about order, excess, and fragile life. The noise is more than noise. It is the sound of human multiplication. More people mean more fields, more grinding stones, more smoke, more waste, more disputes, more offerings, or demands upon water and grain. The ancient city is not a peaceful painting. It is dense and practical. Its beauty lies beside crowding, hunger, heat, smells, insects, and the daily genius of not falling apart completely. A miracle, really, considering everyone is awake before sunrise. In the mythic imagination, heaven hears this pressure as disturbance. The gods, once relieved of labour by human creation, are now burdened by the very beings made to serve them. That is the irony. Humanity solves one divine problem and creates another. The clayworkers multiply. Their voices fill the spaces between temples. Their lives become too present to ignore. You hear the council's unease forming above the city. The gods do not merely dislike chatter, they fear imbalance. A world that grows too noisy may also be the world slipping beyond control. Sound becomes a measure of disorder, and disorder invites deceit. In ancient thought, cosmic balance is precious. Rivers must follow channels. Offerings must follow calendars. Kings must hold justice, or at least claim to with suitably expensive inscriptions. When noise breaks proportion, danger follows. This is where Enki's role begins to glow in the shadows. He understands that human sound is not only rebellion, it is need, it is hunger, birth, labour, pain, trade, celebration, grief, and survival pressing against the air. To a distant authority, the noise may sound intolerable. To wisdom, it may sound like the unavoidable music of clay creatures trying to live inside a demanding world. A quirky fringe tidbit clings to the theme of noise. Some alternative interpreters have suggested that the complaint about human clamour might preserve a memory of ancient ecological overload, overpopulation, or even conflict between human workers and ruling powers. Mainstream scholarship treats the wording as mythic and theological, not as a literal report. Still, the idea touches something real. Cities do grow loud when systems strain. The scholarly debate remains open and careful. Some researchers emphasize the flood story as theological drama, exploring why divine powers might limit humanity. Others read it through social memory of river floods in southern Mesopotamia, where real environmental disaster could become sacred narrative. A further discussion asks whether the noise motif encodes anxiety about urban growth, labour unrest, or ritual disorder. Perhaps the myth allows all these meanings to breathe. You move through the city at midday. Heat presses downward until even the shadows seem tired. The smell of fish, smoke, clay, sweat, and grain thickens in the lanes. A canal runs beside a wall, green at the edges, alive with insects. Children crouch near the water, poking at something their parents would definitely prefer they leave alone. A scribe hurries past with a tablet, looking important and slightly annoyed. Above this ordinary life, doom gathers without warning. That is one of the unsettling features of the flood tradition. The people below may not know that their existence has become a subject of divine discussion. They are simply living. They marry, trade, curse bad weather, repair tools, and hope the barley measures are fair. Their noise rises naturally from the fact of being alive, yet from above, their life becomes a problem to be solved. This creates a deep moral tension. Were humans guilty or simply numerous? Were they disobedient or inconvenient? Did their noise represent sin, disorder, or the unavoidable consequence of the god's own creation? The myth does not flatten the question, it lets discomfort remain. A world made for service becomes a world marked for destruction, and the reason given is sound. You pause beside a reed wall. On the other side, someone laughs quietly. The laughter is small, human, and temporary. It does not know it has been judged by heaven. That ignorance feels tender. It is possible that ancient listeners felt the same tenderness when they heard the story recited. They knew human beings were noisy. They also knew noise was life. Enki's wisdom becomes necessary because he hears differently. Where others hear disturbance, he hears vulnerability. Where others see a population, he may see individuals. Where command seeks silence, wisdom seeks preservation, yet he must operate inside the divine order. He cannot simply stand in the city square and announce that the high gods have made a rather alarming decision. Rules bind even the clever, especially the clever. So the flood story begins to move towards secrecy. The decree is forming. The human world does not yet understand. Sound continues to rise from the streets. A pot falls and breaks. Someone swears under their breath. Politely lost to history. An old woman pours water into a jar. A dog sleeps in the shade. The entire city is made of small continuities, and the myth asks whether those continuities can be wiped away by powers that no human eye can meet. The storm is not only weather. It is the moment when a system turns against its own servants. It is the terrible correction of life deemed excessive. It is order becoming violent because it cannot endure the sound of its consequences. In that sense, the story is ancient, but not distant. Every civilization fears the crowd it depends upon. Every authority praises labor until labor becomes audible. The sky darkens in your imagination, though the day below remains bright. You sense the coming water before anyone in the lanes does. The first clouds may still be far beyond the river horizon. The first warning may still be trapped inside the mind of a god who must choose his words carefully. The city continues, unaware that its ordinary sound has crossed some invisible boundary. You listen to that sound one last time. It is not monstrous. It is bowls, sandals, babies, reeds, wheels, goats, prayers, bargaining, coughing, and songs half remembered from mothers who are already gone. It is humanity in its crowded innocence, flawed and irritating. Yes, but alive. And somewhere beneath the official decree, Enki hears the same noise and understands that saving even a fragment of it may be worth the risk. The city breathes, the heavens listen, the waters wait. The warning does not arrive as a proclamation, it does not roll across the city from a temple roof. No herald runs through the streets shouting that the hidden council has turned toward destruction. The message comes more strangely, more softly, and more carefully. It passes through a wall. You are standing inside a reed house at night. The lamps are low. The woven walls breathe with the faint movement of air. Outside, insects hum near standing water, and somewhere in the dark a dog gives one tired bark, then thinks better of making a career out of it. The whole settlement rests in that fragile hour when work has ended, but fear has not. The man inside the house does not yet know that he is becoming a hinge in history. In the famous flood tradition known through Mesopotamian literature, Enki does not openly betray the divine decree. Instead, he speaks indirectly to a wall, allowing the human listener to receive the warning without the god formally breaking the command of secrecy. The detail is extraordinary. Wisdom does not shout. Wisdom finds a legal opening so narrow that only a god of clever water could slip through it. The mainstream historical fact is secure. Mesopotamian flood stories include versions where Enki, or his Akkadian counterpart, warns a chosen human figure through indirect speech. Scholars at major universities have long studied this moment as one of the most elegant examples of divine cunning in ancient literature. It reveals not only compassion, but a culture deeply interested in oaths, boundaries, speech, and responsibility. You listen with the man in the dark. The reed wall rustles. At first, it might be only wind, then the sound gathers pattern. A voice addresses the wall, not the man. The instruction is strange, almost theatrical, as if the house itself must become the witness. Tear down the house. Build a boat, leave possessions, preserve life. These ideas move through the room like cold water under a door. The listener understands enough to be afraid. He is not asked to fight the gods. He is not told to convince the city. He is not given a debate platform, which is probably for the best. Since public meetings about divine floods tend to go badly, he is given instructions, practical, urgent, impossible instructions. A house must become a vessel, a fixed life must become motion, the familiar walls must be sacrificed to survive the waters. This is the genius of the scene. The wall is both barrier and messenger. It separates the man from the outside world, yet it carries the secret inward. It is an ordinary part of domestic life turned into a sacred instrument, in a land of reeds, clay, and mud brick. Revelation does not need marble. It can move through woven stalks, through the humble architecture of survival. A quirky fringe tidbit has grown around this moment. Some modern speculative readers imagine the wall as a coded device, a communication screen, or a symbolic memory of hidden technology. Mainstream scholarship does not support that reading as literal history, yet the scene does feel technologically imaginative in a literary sense. A message is transmitted without direct address, and secrecy is preserved through form. Ancient literature can be very sophisticated. The scholarly debate remains open around the meaning of Enki's indirect speech. Some researchers see it as a brilliant narrative solution to the problem of divine oath breaking. Others read it as evidence of Mesopotamian concern with legal language, where the exact target of speech matters deeply. A further discussion asks whether the wall represents human domestic space itself, the fragile shelter that must be abandoned when cosmic danger arrives. You feel the reed fibres beneath your palm. They are dry, ridged, and faintly rough. The house smells of smoke, grain dust, and sleeping bodies. A storage jar rests against the far wall. Tools hang from pegs. A mat lies rolled near the doorway. These are not grand possessions, but they are the texture of a life. To tear down such a house is to unmake the ordinary world by choice. The warning asks for obedience without explanation. That may be the hardest kind. The man must act before proof arrives. He must begin building under a clear sky, while neighbours still trade gossip and complain about prices with the confidence of people not expecting the ocean to drop by. He must seem strange, maybe foolish, perhaps dangerously ungrateful. The warning does not make him powerful. It makes him isolated. Enki's compassion is therefore not gentle in a simple way. It's Stepenson, but it also separates. The chosen listener becomes responsible for knowledge others do not share. He must carry the burden of secrecy, labour, and possible ridicule. Divine favour is not a cushion, it is a weight placed carefully into human hands. You may wonder why the warning is not given to everyone. The myth does not solve this fully. It leaves you with the discomfort of partial rescue. One man hears, one household prepares, one vessel will carry life through catastrophe. The rest of the city continues in sound and ordinary light. Here the story becomes painfully human. Preservation often begins with limitation. A remnant survives, but not the whole. That is not a comforting arithmetic. And yet, in ancient thought, the remnant matters beyond itself. To preserve one's seed is to preserve the possibility of field. To preserve one household is to preserve memory, craft, ritual, animals, and speech. The boat is not only escape, it is compression. A world must be folded small enough to fit inside wood, pitch, reeds, and obedience. The warning through the wall may also be the first hint of an erased pattern. Enki does not confront the decree directly. He leaves a trace shaped like a loophole. If his later departure was remembered at all, perhaps it would carry the same style, indirect, encoded, preserved through objects. A god of hidden waters leaves signs that can be missed by anyone looking only for thunder. You sit now beside the listener as he absorbs the command. His breathing changes, sleep has left the room, the lamp flame leans and straightens. Outside, the ordinary night continues, almost offensively calm. Frogs call from the marsh. A neighbour coughs through a wall of his own. The sky above gives no warning. The man must decide whether the voice has truly spoken. Faith, here, is not an abstract virtue. It is carpentry. It is gathering materials. It is measuring, sealing, persuading Amelie, enduring stares, and converting fear into labour. The divine message becomes real only because human hands answer it. Enki may whisper, but people must build. That relationship is important. In Mesopotamian myth, divine knowledge does not always remove human effort. Often it increases it. The warned man must become worker, organizer, liar perhaps, or at least careful speaker. He must explain his actions without revealing too much. He must preserve life while the world around him still believes tomorrow will resemble yesterday. The wall listens to him now. It has received the god's words, and perhaps it receives the man's silence in return. Soon it may be torn apart, its reeds reused, its shelter sacrificed. The very object that protected the secret must be destroyed to fulfill it. This is quietly unsettling. Revelation consumes the house that carried it. You hear the first imagined hammering before dawn. Wood knocks against wood, rope tightens, pitch warms and releases a thick, bitter scent. The man's family moves with stiff urgency, confused but obedient. Animals shift in pens. The city stirs around them, not yet alarmed, merely curious. What is he building now? Why so large? Why so frantic? There is always someone in a neighbourhood ready to supervise with no useful skills. The sky remains clear. That clarity deepens the dread. Catastrophe is most frightening before it looks real. The warning lives in the gap between knowledge and evidence. Enki's whisper has entered the human world, but the world has not changed its face. Everything depends now on trusting the hidden source beneath appearances. And that is the essence of Enki's wisdom. It moves before proof. It speaks where command forbids speech. It preserves life through indirection, not spectacle. It does not erase danger, it creates a narrow passage through it. The reed wall grows quiet again. The voice is finished. The night holds its breath. Somewhere below the soil, the deep waters seem to listen, patient and unreadable. The man rises. The vessel begins as an impossible shape in the mind. It is not yet wood, reed, rope, pitch, and measurement. It is first a command laid upon a frightened household, a structure imagined against a disaster no one else can see. In the grey hush before sunrise, that imagined shape starts to enter the wheel. You hear the first strike of tools. A beam is dragged across packed earth. Reeds are bundled and tied. Rope bites into palms. Pitch warms in a pot and releases a dark smell, sharp and heavy, like smoke trapped in tar. The workers move quickly, but not gracefully. Fear rarely improves carpentry. It only makes everyone lift harder and ask fewer cheerful questions. The boat in the Mesopotamian flood tradition is more than transport. It is a chamber of memory. It is a sealed world, built to carry life through the lapse of the known order. Ancient versions describe dimensions, compartments, waterproofing, and the loading of living creatures and goods. Scholars at major universities have studied these details as evidence of both mythic imagination and practical knowledge of riverine culture. The mainstream fact is steady, Sikyas. Mesopotamian flood narratives are older than many later flood traditions, and they preserve a detailed image of survival through a divinely warned vessel. The stories belong to a landscape where rivers, marshes, boats, and seasonal waters were part of ordinary existence. People knew that water could feed a city, and also erase one. That double nature surrounds the vessel. Water is Enki's realm. Water is also the coming threat. The same element that nourishes fields will become the force that destroys them. This is not a simple opposition between good and evil. Ancient myth rarely behaves like a neat moral chart, which is probably merciful, since real life would fail such charts before breakfast. Here, water is gift, boundary, judgment, and passage. The vessel must therefore be sexual against the god's own element. That is unsettling. Enki warns the human survivor, yet the danger arrives through water. Perhaps this is why the story feels so layered. The Deep Lord does not command the storm in every version, but his knowledge moves inside it. He cannot cancel the flood. He can teach someone how to pass through it. Wisdom does not always remove catastrophe. Sometimes it builds a room that can float. You stand near the growing hull. Its walls rise awkwardly against the sky. Neighbours watch from doorways. A few laugh, a few whisper. Some shake their heads with the dignified confidence of people who have never been correct in an emergency. The builder continues. He has moved beyond explanation. Every plank answers the voice that came through the wall. The work becomes ritual. Each joint must hold. Each seam must be sealed. Each compartment must be prepared. Grain must be stored. Water must be carried. Animals must be gathered, fed, and somehow persuaded not to turn survival into complete chaos. Anyone who has handled goats may appreciate the scale of this miracle. Divine warning is one thing, loading livestock is quite another. A quirky fringe tidbit clings to the boat's measurements. Some modern writers compare the vessel's form to engineered survival craft, treating ancient descriptions as traces of technical instruction from a lost advanced culture. Mainstream scholars read the measurements as literary and symbolic, shaped by Mesopotamian knowledge of boats, buildings, and sacred proportion. Still, the text clearly wants you to feel that preservation requires design. That design matters. The boat is not a random refuge. It is ordered space against overwhelming disorder. Outside, the flood will dissolve boundaries. Streets, fields, walls, thresholds, and graves will vanish beneath the same dark water. Inside, compartments preserve distinction. Grain remains grain. Animals remain in their places. Ideally, human bodies breathe within a measured enclosure. Civilization survives by becoming organized interior space. You enter the vessel in imagination. The air is close and resinous. Wood creaks under shifting weight. The smell of animals gathers quickly. Warm, sour, and impossible to ignore. There is stored barley, jars of oil, tools, seeds, perhaps household gods, perhaps tablets, perhaps skills carried only in memory. You realize that the boat holds more than bodies. It holds future habits. Scholarly debate remains careful. Some researchers emphasize real flood events in Mesopotamian river plains as possible background for the tradition. Others argue that the flood narrative is primarily theological, shaped to explore mortality, divine anger, and the fragile privilege of survival. Another debate asks whether the vessel represents a literal boat, a cosmic ark, or a symbolic temple preserving order through chaos. The temple idea is especially quiet and powerful. A temple is a bounded place where the world is arranged correctly. Offerings go where they belong. Sacred objects are placed according to rule. Words are spoken in proper order. The boat does something similar. It becomes a floating sanctuary of classified life. Against the collapsing outside, it holds a miniature creation, trembling but intact. You hear rain begin at last. At first, it is almost gentle. Drops darken the dust. People glance upward, perhaps relieved by the break in heat. Children shout. The scent of wet earth rises, rich and sudden. Then the rain thickens. Channels fill. Courtyards flood. The river loses its familiar edge. The sky seems to lower itself until heaven, earth, and water no longer respect their old agreements. The vessel groans. Inside, fear becomes physical. Bodies press close. Animals cry out. Wood strains. Someone prays too quickly. Someone else is silent. The builder listens for the seams. The family listens for voices outside. Then perhaps stops listening because listening becomes unbearable. The door has closed, and with it the ordinary moral world has changed. There is no easy comfort here. Survival is not innocence. Survival is burden. To live through the flood means carrying the memory of those who did not. The boat preserves life, but it also preserves grief. Every breath inside it is surrounded by water and unanswered questions. Why this household? Why this warning? Why this silence from the sky once the storm begins? Enki's warning has done its work, but Enki himself is not visible. That absence matters. The god who spoke through a wall does not sit inside the vessel explaining divine policy, which would have been useful, though perhaps not calming. His gift is instruction, not companionship. The human survivors must endure the sound of the waters without further guidance. The hidden god remains hidden. The flood outside becomes a great eraser. Fields disappear first, then low walls, then lanes, shrines, storage rooms, and the familiar corners of the city, the place where people argued over grain measures, is gone. The courtyard where a child learned to walk is gone. The doorway where an old woman poured water each morning is gone. The world is not destroyed in abstract terms. It is removed detail by detail. Inside the vessel, details are a garden, a seed basket, a tool handle worn by use, a jar sealed with clay, a remembered chant, the skill of brewing, weaving, planting, shaping bricks, reading omens, and cutting reeds. Perhaps a tablet lies wrapped against dampness, though the story does not need to say so. If even one text survives, it carries more than signs. It carries the stubborn refusal of memory to drown politely. The vessel rocks in darkness. You feel the motion under your ribs. Up, down, turn, pause, strike, drift. Time loses its ordinary measures. There is no fieldwork calendar inside this chamber, no market day, no temple procession, only waiting, breathing, feeding, cleaning, praying, and enduring the smell, which history often forgets because history is kind in selective ways. The boat becomes the wall. This is the hidden transformation. What was built as escape becomes temporary creation. The outside is chaos. The inside is order. Human beings, animals, food, tools, and memory are compressed into one floating system. If they survive, civilization will not begin again from nothing. It will begin from what was carried, and perhaps that is Enki's deeper intention. He does not save a city. He saves continuity. He does not prevent erasure. He inserts a line that the erasure cannot quite break. The flood may wash over fields, walls, and tablets, but a remembered instruction moves through it inside a sealed vessel. Wisdom becomes portable. Civilization becomes cargo. The rain continues without pity. The waters lift the boat above rooftops that are no longer rooftops. The human world below becomes shadow, then depth, then silence. Yet inside the dark chamber, something remains stubbornly awake. A child breathes, an animal shifts, a seed waits. The waters begin to lose their certainty. They no longer climb with one terrible purpose. They shiver, settle, draw back from the high places, and expose the wounded bones of the world. The vessel rests at last, not gently but with the heavy relief of something that has survived beyond its own design. You feel the stillness first. After the storm, silence is not empty. It is crowded with absence. No market voices rise from the drowned streets. No wheels grind along packed lanes. No temple doors open to the first light, and the air smells of wet wood, animal breath, river mud, and decay hidden beneath the waterline. Survival has a scent, and it is not heroic. It is damp and sour and grateful. The door opens. Light enters like a stranger. The survivors step out slowly, blinking into a world that should be familiar but is not. Mud covers everything. Broken reeds cling to stones. Tree branches lie where no trees stood. Fish shine briefly in shallow pools, stranded under the sky. The land has become a tablet scraped clean, though not clean enough to forget what was written there. In Mesopotamian flood traditions, the surviving human offers sacrifice after the waters withdraw. The gods gather around the offering, drawn by its scent, and the divine order begins to negotiate the meaning of survival. Scholars at major universities have studied this scene as a profound reflection on dependence between gods and humans. It is strange, intimate, and quietly revealing. The mainstream historical fact is clear. Ancient Mesopotamian religion centered heavily on offerings, temple care, and reciprocal relations between humans and gods. Food, drink, incense, and ritual attention sustained divine households in symbolic and social terms. So when sacrifice returns after the flood, it signals more than gratitude. It signals the restoration of the human role in the sacred economy. The fire is built on wet ground. That detail matters. Imagine hands shaking as they gather usable fuel. Imagine sparks coaxed into life despite dampness. Imagine smoke rising thinly at first, then thickening as the offering catches. The smell moves upward through the cleansed air, roasted grain, fat, smoke, and salt blend into a scent that says humanity is still here. The message does not need a royal inscription. It rises on heat. The gods notice. There is a tenderness and awkwardness in that image. The divine beings who permitted or planned destruction gather toward the offering because human ritual has returned. It is almost embarrassing, in the way ancient myth sometimes allows gods to seem dependent. The great powers have silenced humanity, then find themselves drawn to the first sign that human service has survived. Apparently the universe missed dinner. The humour passes softly. This moment reveals the tension at the heart of the system. Humans were troublesome enough to destroy, yet necessary enough to preserve. Their noise offended heaven, yet their offerings restored connection. Their labour burdened the earth, yet without them, the divine world loses its earthly rhythm. The flood does not solve humanity, it exposes how deeply the gods are entangled with the clay beings below. You watch the survivor standing beside the fire. His clothes are stiff with salt and mud. His face carries the stunned emptiness of one who has outlived too much. He does not speak like a conqueror. He does not celebrate. He performs ritual because ritual is what remains when explanation fails. The offering becomes the first fragile bridge across the drowned silence. Enki's role has changed. The warning is complete. The vessel has done its work. The waters have withdrawn, yet the god of wisdom does not step fully into daylight to receive applause. There is no grand scene in which he is publicly crowned as humanity's protector. Instead, the divine assembly must reckon with the consequences of survival. Enki's cleverness has preserved a remnant, but it has also forced the system to continue. A quirky fringe tidbit clings to the aftermath. Some alternative writers imagine the post-flood world as a reset of civilization, with survivors carrying hidden technical knowledge from an older age into a devastated landscape. Mainstream historians do not accept sweeping claims of lost global technology from these myths. Still, the literary idea of preserved knowledge is present and powerful. The survivor carries skills, memory, and sacred instruction into a broken world. The scholarly debate remains careful. Some researchers interpret the flood as mythic memory of real river catastrophes magnified by religious imagination. Others read the story primarily as moral theology, asking why divine judgment is restrained and human life continues. Another discussion asks whether the survivor's sacrifice reflects a deeper concern with ritual continuity after social collapse. You walk across the mud with the survivors. Every step makes a soft, sucking sound. The ground pulls at the feet, as though the earth itself is reluctant to release anyone. Household objects lie scattered without owners. A jar neck, a broken spindle whirl, a child's small charm, still caught in reeds. These details are not in every text, but they belong to the emotional truth of such a story. Catastrophe always leaves small things behind. The world must be named again. This is one of the quieter horrors of survival. Roads must be found where roads are gone. Boundaries must be redrawn. Graves may be impossible to locate. Fields must be cleared. Canals opened. Animals counted. Seed protected. Shelter built. Civilization is not restored by a single prayer. It is restored by labour repeated until the land accepts human order again. That labour echoes humanity's first purpose. People were shaped to work, serve, maintain, and mediate between earth and gods. After the flood, that role returns with painful clarity. The survivors are not free from the system. They are responsible for beginning it again. Their hands must rebuild what divine decree destroyed. Their devotion must reopen the channel between heaven and ground. Perhaps this is why Enki recedes. His intervention saves the future, but it cannot remove the cost of the past. Once continuity is secured, he becomes less visible, almost as if wisdom withdraws when its work is done. The people must now live with the burden of preserved life. They must plant, remember, and perhaps avoid asking too loudly why the warning did not extend farther. The answer would not help them sleep. You look toward the horizon where water still gleams in hollows. Birds circle uncertainly. The air is washed and raw, clouds thin into pale strands. Somewhere, the vessel rests like a dead animal, useful beyond beauty. Its wooden body has carried the world, but it cannot remain the world forever. The survivors must step away from it. The boat becomes memory. At first, it is close enough to touch. Later, it becomes a landmark. Later still, a story. Then a sacred account copied by scribes, shaped by languages, embedded in larger traditions. The wood decays. If wood there was, the memory hardens. The living event becomes literature, and literature becomes the only vessel left. That transformation matters to the erased departure. If Enki's role changed after the flood, the change would be subtle. He has preserved life, but the system may not wish to center the god who softened its decree. Later tellings may honor him while placing stronger emphasis elsewhere. Gratitude can coexist with discomfort. A rescuer who exposes the cruelty of authority is not always celebrated without anxiety. You can feel that anxiety near the soak. The gods gather. The survivor offers and the world resumes. But how trust has been altered. Humanity now knows, through one household at least, that the divine order can decide against it. The gods now know that total destruction threatens their own relationship with Earth. The balance returns, but innocence does not. Something has shifted beneath the ritual. The survivor may become honoured, distant, even immortal in some versions, yet the ordinary descendants must inherit a quieter lesson. They live because a secret warning survived. They serve because service remains necessary. They fear because memory has water in it. Every canal, every rainstorm, and every rising river may carry a whisper of that first terrible abundance. The mud dries slowly under the sun. Cracks appear. Seeds are pressed into the ground. A small shelter is raised. Smoke rises again at evening, this time from a cooking fire rather than a desperate offering. Someone laughs unexpectedly, then stops. Surprised by the sound, life returns in fragments. Not because the world is healed, but because living things keep making claims upon mourning. Enki is present in the fragments. He is in the stored seed, the repaired tool, the remembered instruction, the water that must now be guided instead of feared. Yet he is less like a visible guardian and more like a principle folded into survival. His wisdom has moved from speech into practice. His rescue has become work. The land darkens as evening comes. The survivors sit close to the first new fire, too tired for grand understanding. Above them, the sky is enormous and unreadable. Below them, the ground holds too much water and too many dead memories. Between sky and ground, humanity begins again with mud on its feet and smoke in its hair. The world has returned, but it has not returned unminged. A departure without farewell is difficult to see. It leaves no abandoned sandals at a doorway, no final speech carved neatly into stone, no grieving crowd gathered beneath the temple gate. It is more like a lamp being turned lower each evening, until one night the room is dark and everyone insists it has always been this dim. You feel that dimming now. The old stories do not need to say that Enki dies, because gods in these traditions do not vanish in such a simple way. They shift, they are renamed, they are absorbed into larger theological structures, their functions pass into new arrangements, their cities lose power, and their oldest qualities are preserved like shells in later language. A divine departure may look less like disappearance and more like rearrangement. That is quieter. It is also more unsettling. Settling. You stand again within a temple room, but the atmosphere has changed. The bowl of water remains, the offering table remains, the priest still knows the correct words, yet the centre of gravity feels slightly altered. The ritual continues with proper care, but the living urgency of the god has moved farther away. The shape is present, the pulse is softer. This is how sacred memory often taken. The mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamian religion changed over many centuries as Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian traditions interacted. Gods could gain, lose, or transform status as cities rose and fell. Scholars at institutions such as Chicago, Oxford, and Yale have shown that divine identities were often layered through translation, political change, and scribal scholarship. Enki did not simply disappear from later tradition. That would be too easy, and history dislikes being easy. He continued in related forms, especially through the Akkadian name Er, who remained associated with wisdom, magic, fresh water, and counsel. Yet continuity is not the same as unchanged presence. A god may survive by becoming someone slightly different. You can sense the difference in a name. A name is not only a label, it carries sound, place, memory, and worship. When a divine name shifts across languages, something is preserved, and something is thinned. The new name may spread farther than the old one, appearing in grander texts and wider empires. At the same time, the local intimacy of the older shrine may grow faint. The god travels by translation, but translation always takes a toll. A quirky fringe tidbit follows this change of names. Some modern enthusiasts imagine Enki's departure as a literal leaving of the earth, later hidden by priests who changed his name to disguise the event. Mainstream historians do not accept that as a proven account. Still, the idea captures one emotional truth. When an older god is absorbed into a later system, it can feel as if someone has departed while still being mentioned. This is the strange heart of the matter. You may hear Enki's name in a hymn and still wonder whether the oldest Enki is there. You may see his symbols continue and still feel that the original current has retreated. His waters remain in theology, but do they still open the first city's hidden door? His wisdom remains admired, but does it still challenge the harsher decree his magic remains powerful? But is it still the living compassion of the deep? The scholarly debate remains cautious. Some researchers emphasize continuity between Enki and later Ea, seeing one enduring divine figure adapted across languages and periods. Others focus on transformation, asking how political centers and scribal schools reshaped older Sumerian identities. A further question stays unresolved: when does adaptation preserve a god, and when does it quietly replace him? There is no simple line. You walk through an archive where tablets from different centuries rest side by side. On one, the language is Sumerian, old and formal. On another, the same divine figure appears in Akkadian dress, wearing a familiar wisdom through a different voice. Later scribes study the older texts as learned tradition, sometimes preserving words they no longer spoke in daily life. The sacred past becomes scholarship. That is both beautiful and sad. A living cult can become a learned reference. A local god can become a theological category. A dangerous helper of humanity can become a respectable lord of ritual incantations. Nothing has vanished exactly, yet something has cooled, like bread left too long near a hearth after the family has gone to sleep. You notice how absence hides inside respect. People may continue honouring a god precisely while removing his sharper edges. Enki the trickster, rescuer, and quiet opponent of excessive destruction can be remembered as wise without being allowed to disturb authority too much. His clever mercy can become one trait among many. His old watery independence can be contained within a more orderly pantheon. A departure can be domesticated. No one needs to deny him. No one needs to burn every tablet. Instead, scribes copy him into safer frameworks. Priests keep his rituals where they belong. Royal theology emphasizes other powers when useful. Later traditions inherit the shape, but not always the tension. The god remains. Yet his oldest role withdraws like groundwater below a cracked field. Your hand rests on a temple threshold worn smooth by centuries. People have crossed it, carrying offerings, fears, and formal words. They may not ask whether the god has departed. They may not feel the question at all. For them, the temple is functioning. The calendar continues. The water is poured, and the chant is correct. Continuity can be very persuasive. Still, the imagination detects a hollow place. It is not proof. It is pattern. The god of the first sacred city becomes less central as later cities dominate. The deep counselor remains powerful, but often from the side. The one who preserves humanity through indirect speech becomes part of grand compositions where other gods command broader fear. His presence survives, but his centrality wavers. Perhaps the erased script is not a missing tablet with dramatic words. Perhaps it is this slow ritual absence. A script can be erased by scraping. Yes, but it can also be erased by rewriting the stage around it. Move the throne. Change the language. Keep the title. Adjust the hymn. Let time perform the quietest censorship of all. Time is very good, Adamthumar. You feel the temple evening settle. Wax smoke curls near the ceiling. A priest closes a small container. The water bowl reflects a flame, then trembles when someone passes. No one speaks of farewell. No one needs to. The room itself has learned to continue with less presence. That is one of the oldest human arts. To continue with less. Human communities do this after loss, after conquest, after drought, after the names of ancestors become sounds without faces. They do it with gods too. The ritual remains as a bridge. Even when the far bank becomes difficult to see, a departure without farewell leaves people practicing relationship with a power whose nearness has changed. Enki's possible removal, then, is not a loud myth of exile. It is a soft theological weathering. His deep waters are still there, but harder to enter. His wisdom is still invoked, but less disruptive. His name is still preserved, but carried through different tongues. The absence is not total. It is partial, layered, and therefore more believable. You listened for him beneath the floor. There is no answer in words, only the old imagined water, moving patiently under foundations, touching bricks that no longer know sunlight. The god has not vanished from memory, but memory has changed its depth. Perhaps departure means becoming inaccessible while remaining necessary. Perhaps it means passing from voice into foundation. The lamp burns lower. The priest leaves. The bowl cools. Outside, the city continues its evening noises, unaware that sacred absence can be as carefully maintained as sacred presence. And somewhere beneath the temple, the deep keeps flowing without farewell. The archive is darker than the temple hall. It has no grand statue, no public altar, no procession of worshippers carrying baskets and jars. It is a quieter chamber, lined with shelves, baskets, clay jars, and low piles of tablets wrapped in dust. Here, memory does not sing, it waits. You step carefully across the floor. Under your feet, old clay flakes softly. The air smells of dry earth, lamp soot, and reeds. Somewhere in the room, a mouse would be entirely unsurprising, although probably not welcome near the accounts of barley and temple sheep. Ancient archives, for all their sacred importance, were still physical places. They had storage problems, they had pests, they had people losing things. Yet inside such rooms, civilizations guarded their own shape. The scribes who copied Mesopotamian traditions were not simply writers in the modern sense. They were trained keepers of language, ritual, law, administration, omens, hymns, lists, and inherited formulas. Their education was long and disciplined. They practiced signs again and again until the language entered the hand. They learned old words that may no longer have been spoken by ordinary people. They became bridges to vanished voices. The mainstream historical fact is clear. Scribal schools in Mesopotamia preserved Sumerian literary and religious compositions long after Sumerian had ceased to be a daily spoken language. Scholars at major universities have studied school tablets, lexical lists, and copied myths as evidence for a learned culture that treated ancient texts as prestigious knowledge. The past became something trained people could access. That access was power. If you can read the old signs, you can speak with dead kings, gods, teachers, and legal disputes that should have ended centuries ago. You can decide which version of a hymn deserves copying. You can teach one tablet and ignore another. You can preserve a difficult passage or quietly smooth it into something safer, not because you're evil, because every tradition survives through choices. This is where silence becomes active. A missing story may not be hidden by a villain with a blade. It may be lost because no master assigned it to students. It may vanish because a temple no longer funded the copying of that hymn. It may fade because a city declined, a language shifted, or a ritual calendar changed. In archives, forgetting can be ordinary. That is almost worse. You see a young scribe seated before his teacher. The tablet in his lap is damp and soft. His stylus leaves wedges that lean too far left. The teacher sighs, perhaps with the eternal sorrow of educated adults everywhere. The boy copies a divine name. Then he copies an old phrase whose meaning is explained through a word list. He may love the story, or he may only want the lesson finished. Either way, he preserves it. A quirky fringed tidbit moves through this archive like a draft under a door. Some alternative writers imagine priestly scribes as gatekeepers of forbidden knowledge about Enki, hiding records of his departure from ordinary people. Mainstream historians are much more cautious, and the evidence shows scribes preserving, adapting, and organizing texts, not a neat secret order controlling all memory. Still, scribes truly did decide what entered the learned stream. That is enough mystery without decoration. The scholarly debate remains open in a careful way. Some researchers emphasize the conservatism of scribal education, where old compositions were copied because they carried cultural prestige. Others focus on creativity within copying, showing how scribes altered, expanded, or recontextualized inherited material. Another question remains especially delicate when a religious text survives only through later copies. How much of the original world can still be heard? The room offers no easy answer. A tablet may be copied faithfully in signs while changing in meaning, because the world around it has changed. A Sumerian hymn copied in a Babylonian school may retain ancient words, yet the students reading it belong to a different age, different politics, and different sacred assumptions. The text remains, but its atmosphere is translated by time. You run your fingers above a row of tablets without touching them. Each one is a small locked door. Some hold rituals for healing, some list offerings, some preserve myths of gods travelling, speaking, feasting, creating, judging, or deceiving. Some are administrative, with counts of sheep, grain, labourers, and fields. Sacred memory and accounting often lived close together because temples needed both prayers and inventories. The divine household was spiritual, but also extremely interested in applause. That detail matters. The same institution that honours a god also manages resources. Priests and scribes do not operate in pure moonlight. They live among rations and land claims, personnel, and obligations. A myth about Enki's compassion may sit near a record of grain disbursement. A hymn to deep wisdom may share a shelf with a complaint about missing livestock. Civilization is never only sublime, it is sublime with paperwork. Within such a world, textual survival depends on usefulness. A ritual text used in healing may be copied often. A royal inscription serving power may be displayed proudly. A myth required for education may survive in school tablets, but a local tradition that no longer serves a major institution may fade. A story of Enki's withdrawal, if it existed in some early form, might not need suppression. It might simply lose its function. That possibility feels painfully plausible. You imagine a priest deciding what tablets should be recopied before the old ones crumble. There is limited time, limited clay, limited training, limited patience. Which history should mention more often? He chooses the incantations still used, the hymns required for festivals, the lists needed for teaching, the texts honoured by patrons. A strange old composition about Enki leaving the visible order may seem obscure, troubling, or unnecessary. It waits on a shelf, then the shelf breaks, or the building floods, or a conqueror burns the city, or the tablet is reused as fill, or it survives, but only the corner does. That is how worlds disappear while everyone is busy doing reasonable things. The archive becomes a landscape of decisions. Some offences are accidental, but are institutional, some are born from reverence. A difficult tradition may be avoided not because people hate it, but because it feels too powerful, too archaic, too local, or too hard to fit into current theology. Guarding the past can mean enclosing it. Enclosing it can mean narrowing its future. You sit beside an older scribe now. His hands are steady, though the joints are swollen. He knows signs the younger students find irritating. He remembers variants his teacher mentioned from an earlier tablet, now lost, when he copies Enki's name. Perhaps he pauses. Perhaps he thinks of older stories not written in the version before him. Perhaps he says nothing, because saying nothing is sometimes how learned people survive. This is not conspiracy, but is culture. The erased script may be imagined as the sum of these quiet pressures. Not one forbidden tablet, not one dramatic erasure. A chain of guarded gaps. Priests who preserve what the temple needs. Scribes who copy what schools value. Kings who support gods useful to kingship, students who transmit what examination demands, because even ancient students knew the terror of being asked the wrong list. A little humour drifts away, the deeper thought remains. Human beings preserve memory through institutions, and institutions always have preferences. The archive is not neutral, it is a sieve with sacred hands. It catches many wonders, but not everything. What slips through may be the very thing later generations most wish to hear. You breathe in the dry air of the tablet room. Dust rests on the shelves like old sleep. The lamp flame is small, steady, and amber. Outside, as the temple courtyard carries faint sounds of footsteps, water jars, and low speech. Inside, the tablets keep their broken patience. Enki belongs here as much as in the watery deep. He is wisdom preserved through spines. He is craft in the stylus. He is hidden knowledge stored behind ordinary walls. Yet he is also vulnerable here, because even hidden knowledge needs copying. Even divine memory depends on clay, school, habit, and human attention. A god may live beneath the waters, but his story lives only if hands keep pressing signs into earth. The old scribe sets down his stylus. One tablet is finished, another is not. The unfinished one rests beside him, damp and waiting, its future undecided. Perhaps it will dry, perhaps it will be copied, perhaps it will be forgotten under a broken shelf. In the archive, silence is not empty. It is curated, accidental, practical, sacred, and deeply human. It is made from choices no single person fully understands, and somewhere among those choices, Enki's departure may have become not a tale told aloud, but a space protected by dust. The night sky opens above Eridu like a second ocean. It is dark, immense, and glittering with signs no human hand has pressed into clay. The stars do not speak, yet ancient watchers gave them names, patterns, warnings, and sacred duties. They looked upward and found another kind of writing, one made of light instead of wedges. You stand on the edge of the old marshland. The ground is cool beneath your feet. Reeds move softly in the night air. Frogs call from hidden pools, and the smell of damp earth rises after sunset. Above, the heavens seem impossibly clear. There is no city glare, no electric haze, no late message glowing rudely beside your pillow. Only stars, slow planets, darkness, and the patient habit of looking up. For the people of Mesopotamia, the sky was not scenery. It was a field of knowledge. Celestial movements were watched, recorded, compared, and interpreted across generations. Priests and scholars observed the moon, planets, eclipses, weather signs, and stellar risings with great seriousness. Their records became part of a long tradition of omen literature and astronomical learning. The mainstream historical fact is strong. Mesopotamian scholars produced some of the earliest systematic records of celestial observation, and later Babylonian astronomy became highly sophisticated. Researchers at institutions such as Oxford, Chicago, and Yale have studied these traditions as foundational to the history of science, mathematics, and scholarly prediction. The sky was both sacred text and measurable order. That combination matters. Ancient sky watching did not separate religion and observation the way modern categories often do. A planet could be a divine sign and still be tracked carefully. An eclipse could carry omen meaning and still require precise records. A star's rising could matter for ritual, calendar, agriculture, and power. To watch the heavens was to study divine order with disciplined eyes. You imagine an observer on a temple roof, his robe gathers the night air, a clay tablet rests near his knee. He marks the position of the moon. He notes weather, direction, brightness, and timing. Perhaps he's cold, perhaps he's bored, perhaps he wishes the gods would choose a more comfortable hour for cosmic communication. But he watches anyway, because knowledge requires patience. Enki's connection to the sky is not as obvious as his connection to water. He belongs to the deep, to the hidden fresh waters beneath the earth. Yet ancient cosmology often folds opposites together. The world below and the sky above can mirror each other. Water reflects stars. The night marsh turns heaven upside down. A pool becomes a dark tablet where constellations tremble. That image changes everything. If Enki's realm is the deep, then the deep may also hold the reflection of heaven. The gate to his hidden world is not only a hole in the ground or a temple basin, it may be any place where water catches starlight and makes the sky appear below your feet. For a moment, heaven and the underworld of fresh waters touch in silence. You look into a still pool. The stars float there, broken by a small insect's movement. The surface trembles, and the heavens scatter. Then the water settles, and the stars return. It is easy to understand why ancient minds saw messages in such moments. The world seems layered, and each layer answers another. A quirky fringe tidbit circles this image. Some modern writers connect Eridu and Enki with stargates, cosmic visitors, or hidden knowledge arriving from the heavens through the watery deep. Mainstream archaeology does not support claims of literal stargates, yet the symbolism is powerful enough without turning it into machinery. Water-reflecting stars already creates a natural doorway in the imagination. The scholarly debate remains careful here. Some researchers emphasize practical astronomy, showing how celestial records supported calendars, omens, and royal decisions. Others examine the symbolic relationship between temples, cosmic geography, and divine realms. A further question remains open. How much did some specific city cults shape the way heavenly signs were interpreted through local gods and sacred landscapes? The answer shifts with evidence. You walk toward the sacred precinct in the night. The temple mound is dark against the stars. A shallow basin near the shrine holds water for ritual. Its surface catches a bright planet. The reflection seems to rest inside the bowl, as though the heavens have lowered themselves into Enki's domain. A priest approaching such a basin would not need modern fantasy to feel awe. The world itself has performed the trick. This is where the Abzu gate becomes an image rather than a doorway of stone. The deep waters are below, the stars are above, the temple stands between them. Human beings enter with offerings, words and questions. In ritual space, the levels of the universe align. A bowl of water can hold the sky. A sign in heaven can be interpreted on earth. A hidden god can be approached through visible gestures. That structure makes Enki's departure even more subtle. If his realm connects below and above through reflection, then his withdrawal could appear as a loss of interpretive depth. The sky remains, the water remains, the rituals remain. But the sense that they speak to one another through his wisdom may fade. People still read omens, still pour water, still copy lists, yet the deep grammar linking signs together becomes harder to hear. You feel this as a quiet thinning. The stars do not vanish, they are still magnificent. The temple does not fall instantly and the basin is still filled, but meaning becomes more specialized, perhaps more formal, perhaps more controlled by scholarly systems. What once felt like a living conversation between deep water and heaven becomes a learned method, precise and impressive, but less intimate. Knowledge survives, yet wonder changes shape. A distant bell would not have rung here, but you may imagine a soft ritual sound, a metal vessel touched lightly, a low chant passing into the night. The scent of incense mixes with wet reeds, sandals scrape softly across a platform. The observer on the roof and the priest by the basin serve the same mystery from different heights. One looks upward, one looks downward, both search for order. Mesopotamian scholarship loved order. It collected omens in vast series, arranged signs, matched events with outcomes, and tried to understand what the gods might reveal through repeated patterns. The habit is deeply human. When life is fragile, pattern becomes mercy. Even a warning can be comforting if it proves the universe is not random. Yet Enki's wisdom is not only pattern, it is interpretation with compassion. It is the ability to find a saving path when the sign seems fatal. A star may warn, a flood may come, a decree may stand, but wisdom asks whether there is still a hidden opening, a reed wall, a vessel, a human remnant, a way through. Without that wisdom, signs can become fear. You pause beneath the sky. The stars are bright enough to make the land feel ancient even in the present moment. Above you, constellations turn without concern. Around you, the marsh breathes in small sounds. Below you, the old waters wait in darkness. You're placed between immensities, just as early people were placed there, trying to read their lives between heaven and depth. Perhaps Enki's gate was never an object. Perhaps it was a relation. The relation between water and star, between hidden source and visible sign, between practical knowledge and sacred meaning. When that relation weakened, the gate did not close with a crash. It simply became harder to recognize. A pool became only water. A star became only omen. A ritual became only form. Still, at night, the older feeling returns. You look into the dark basin, and the sky appears inside it. The reflection is fragile, but real. One breath can disturb it. One moment of stillness can restore it. That is enough to understand why a god of deep wisdom might never be entirely absent. He may withdraw from tablets, councils, and royal systems, yet remain wherever hidden water receives the stars. The pool trembles, the heavens scatter, then slowly, quietly, they return. Numbers gather where memory becomes too wide for ordinary speech. They stand in columns, circles, rain lengths, measures, lists, and sacred totals, giving shape to what would otherwise drift away into mist. In the old Mesopotamian imagination, numbers are not cold. They breathe with order. They hold time together. You enter a scribal room where calculation is a sacred habit. Clay tablets lie in rows, some filled with lists of barley, labour days, land areas, and rations. Others preserve mathematical exercises, tables, and carefully arranged numerical systems. The signs are small, but the thinking behind them is immense. A student bends over a tablet, pressing values into wet clay, perhaps wondering why the universe could not be organised in a slightly less demanding fashion. Ancient Mesopotamia developed a powerful numerical tradition based on a system that counted by 60s. This sexagesimal system influenced measures of time and angles that still echo today in minutes, seconds, and degrees. Researchers at major universities have studied Mesopotamian mathematics as one of the great intellectual achievements of the ancient world, practical in administration and elegant in abstract problem-solving. That fact matters here. When ancient texts speak in vast reigns, sacred counts, repeated cycles, and structured lists, they are not merely being extravagant. They belong to a culture trained to organize reality through number. Grain must be counted, labor must be assigned, fields must be measured, ritual calendars must be observed, heavenly movements must be tracked. Time itself becomes something one can mark, divide, extend, and perhaps fear. You look at a tablet of numbers under lamplight. The columns are neat. The clay is drying at the edges. Each sign fixes a value, but also a promise that the world can be made intelligible. The scribe believes, or at least hopes, that order can be pressed into matter. That is a very human hope. It is also a fragile one. The ancient king traditions use immense spans for rulers before the flood, with reigns reaching into thousands or tens of thousands of years. Modern scholars generally treat these figures as symbolic, ideological, or mythic rather than literal chronology. Yet symbolism does not mean emptiness. Numbers can magnify sacred distance. They can separate primordial time from ordinary human time. They can say, this belongs to an age beyond your measure. Here the hidden timeline becomes mathematical. Pittis receive kingship. Reigns accumulate. The flood interrupts. Time narrows. The sequence moves from the vast and dreamlike into something closer to remembered history. It is not a smooth scientific chart, it is a sacred compression of ages, where number becomes the bridge between myth and record. A quirky fringe tidbit has grown around these ancient counts. Some modern speculative writers treat the enormous reign lengths as coded astronomical cycles, hidden calendars of divine returns, or schedules of ancient beings leaving and revisiting the earth. Mainstream scholarship does not accept such claims as established history. Still, the numbers invite pattern seeking because they are too deliberate to feel casual. You can understand the temptation. A reign of thousands of years does not sound like ordinary kingship. A cycle broken by flood sounds like more than local politics. A god linked with hidden wisdom, creation, and survival seems naturally suited to a calendar beneath the calendar. The mind begins to ask whether ancient numbers are measuring not rulers, but phases, ages of presence, ages of silence, ages when divine powers draw near, then withdraw. The scholarly debate remains careful and technical. Some researchers analyse the kingless numbers as products of scribal mathematics and symbolic royal ideology. Others compare versions of the list to understand how numbers changed across copies and political contexts. A further question remains unresolved when an ancient number is clearly not literal. How much meaning did its original audience still hear inside it? That question matters more than it first appears. Modern people often divide facts and symbols too sharply. Ancient scribes could use a number symbolically and still treat it as serious. A sacred total might not describe a calendar year in the modern sense. Yet it could express divine proportion, completeness, legitimacy, or cosmic rhythm. A symbolic number is not fake. It is doing different work. You sit beside a scribe learning multiplication tables. His teacher recites values slowly. The boy repeats them, perhaps with the expression of someone reconsidering all his life choices. A reed stylus taps the clay. Outside, a canal carries water along a measured gradient. In the distance, a temple calendar governs offerings. Above, the moon moves through its phases with obedient brilliance. Everything depends on counting. To irrigate is to count water, days, fields, and labour. To worship is to count offerings, festival dates, purification periods, and sacred portions. To rule is to count people, grain, animals, taxes, and years. To read the heavens is to count appearances, intervals, risings, and eclipses. Civilization becomes a web of numbers, and each number promises that chaos can be delayed, but the flood story breaks that twist. Promise. The water rises beyond measure, the fields vanish, the calendar fails, ordinary counts no longer hold. This is why post-flood time feels so significant. Measurement must begin again. The world must be recounted, redivided, renamed, and re-entered into order. If Enki preserves life through the vessel, he also preserves the possibility of counting after catastrophe. This gives his departure a numerical shadow. Perhaps his withdrawal can be imagined through cycles rather than a single event. There is a time of closeness, when deep wisdom organizes creation and warns humanity. There is a time of crisis, when the system nearly ends. There is a time of survival, when wisdom becomes embedded in human practice. Then comes a time of distance, when the pattern remains but the voice grows faint. Not a farewell, a cycle. Ancient thought often moved through cycles of foundation, disruption, renewal, and decline. Agricultural life itself taught this rhythm. Flood and recession, sowing and harvest, lunar waxing and waning, temple rebuilding and decay, city rise and abandonment. The same pattern could be projected into divine history. Gods arrive through order, withdraw through silence, return through ritual, and fade through neglect. You examine a numerical tablet again, its signs are not dramatic. They do not mention Enki leaving, they do not whisper secret dates to the careless reader, but they show a culture for whom pattern mattered intensely, and where pattern matters, absence may also be patterned. A missing god is not only gone, he is out of phase. That phrase drifts softly, out of phase. The deep water is still there, but not aligned with human hearing. The stars still reflect, but the interpretation is weaker. The old story still survives, but its strongest line is missing. The god's departure may be less like travel across space and more like a change in rhythm between humanity and hidden wisdom. A second quirky tradition appears in later numerological readings of Mesopotamia. Some enthusiasts obsess over sacred 60s, 3s, 7s, 12s, and flood durations, weaving elaborate maps of divine schedules. Most of those maps tell us more about modern pattern hunger than ancient intent. Yet ancient scribes also loved structured lists, ranked gods, counted reigns, and ordered signs. The hunger for pattern is not new. It is very old clay. The open debate, therefore, must remain honest. Scholars can reconstruct mathematical systems and compare textual numbers, but they cannot always recover the emotional meaning numbers carried for listeners in temple or court settings. A huge reign length may have sounded majestic, terrifying, legitimizing, or all three. A cycle may have felt like proof that history had a hidden spine. You let the numbers slow your thoughts. 60, 3,600, 36,000, vast measures multiplying beyond lived experience. The human mind cannot easily feel such time, so it turns numbers into atmosphere. You do not picture every year. You feel distance. You feel a past so far away that gods seem closer than grandparents. That is exactly what the ancient lists achieve. The scribe finishes his exercise. He smooths the surface of a failed tablet and begins again. Clay allows revision before it hardens. Time does not. Once a tradition dries into canon, changes become harder, though never impossible. A missing line may remain missing for millennia. A symbolic number may outlive the city that first understood it. The lamp flickers. On the tablet, columns of numbers stand like little walls against the dark. They cannot save anyone by themselves. Yet through them, people learn to predict, measure, distribute, and remember. Enki, Lord of Wisdom and Craft, belongs naturally to this measured world. He is the intelligence that knows channels need gradients, calendars need moons, and survival needs more than hope. If he departed, the numbers remained. That may be the most haunting possibility. The system kept operating after the living source withdrew. Scribes still counted, priests still scheduled offerings, kings still claimed reigns, astronomers still watched the sky. Civilization continued with its inherited mathematics, like a clock still ticking in a house whose maker has stepped outside. And in the ticking, you hear both order and loneliness. The old names begin to change in your ears. They do not disappear all at once. They pass from one language into another, softened, sharpened, reshaped by tongues that inherit what they cannot fully repeat. A god once heard in Sumerian speech is heard later through Akkadian words, then through Babylonian scholarship, then through the careful fragments of modern study. Memory travel. It changes clothes. You stand in a city where scribes know more than one sacred language. Sumerian has become ancient, prestigious, and learned, while Akkadian fills daily administration, royal inscription, letter, and law. The older words remain powerful precisely because they are old. Students copy them with care, even when their spoken world has moved elsewhere. Sacred language becomes a polished vessel from a former age. Enki passes through this change. In later Akkadian tradition, he is widely known as Ie, Boel, a divine figure of wisdom, magic, fresh water, and counsel. Many qualities continue, The deep waters remain, the intelligence remains, the role of helper and advisor remains, yet the surrounding world is altered. A name that once belonged to the sacred atmosphere of Eridu now moves through broader imperial literature, priestly scholarship, and new theological arrangements. The mainstream historical fact is clear. Mesopotamian religion did not remain frozen in one Sumerian form. Across centuries, Sumerian and Akkadian traditions interacted deeply, and divine figures were translated, equated, reorganized, and ranked within changing political worlds. Scholars at major centers of ancient Near Eastern study have shown how the pantheon evolved through city rivalry, conquest, scribal learning, and theological system building. This evolution is not a small detail. It is the mechanism by which gods survive. A divine figure tied to one city can become larger than that city by entering the language of another people. That is survival through expansion, but survival through expansion asks for sacrifice. The god becomes more portable, more adaptable, more useful across kingdoms. At the same time, the earliest local edges may blur, the marsh smell fades, the first shrine grows distant, the old water is poured into a new jar. You feel the new jar in your hands. It is finely made, perhaps more elegant than the older vessel. It holds the water well. It may even carry it farther, but it is not the same shape. That difference matters when you are listening for departure. Enki may not leave by walking away from the earth. He may leave by becoming Ea in a world where his oldest setting no longer defines him. This is not loss alone. Ea remains a powerful and respected god in later Mesopotamian tradition. He is associated with wisdom, incantation, ritual knowledge, and the deep fresh waters. In magical texts, his authority can be invoked for healing and protection. In myths, he often continues to counsel, interpret, and intervene with remarkable subtlety. The old intelligence has not been extinguished. Still, the tone changes. In a wider pantheon, Ea is one power among many, placed within grander theological systems dominated at different times by other divine centers. Babylon's rise brings Marduk to extraordinary prominence. Assyrian tradition elevates Asher. Local gods and older figures are not necessarily rejected, but their roles are often rearranged around new capitals and royal claims. Divine memory bends toward power. A quirky fringe tidbit clings to this shift. Some modern speculative writers argue that the renaming of Enki as Ea marks a deliberate concealment of an older being's true identity, as if the name change were a mask placed over forbidden history. Mainstream scholarship views the change through language, culture, and religious development, yet the emotional force of the claim reveals something real about names. When a name changes, people often feel a door has closed. You walk through a Babylonian library chamber in imagination. Tablets rest in ordered rows. Some preserve ancient Sumerian compositions with explanations. Others present myths where Ea appears in relation to newer divine hierarchies. The room is more elaborate than the earliest shrine, more intellectually dense, more self-aware. The scribes here do not merely inherit tradition, they study it, arrange it, compare it, and sometimes improve it with the confidence of scholars everywhere. The scholarly debate remains nuanced. Some researchers emphasize continuity, arguing that Enki and Ea represent a long-lived divine identity adapted across languages. Others emphasize transformation, pointing out that translation can reshape a god's functions, relationships, and narrative importance. A further question remains open when later scribes preserve older theology. Are they protecting it, controlling it, or quietly replacing it with commentary? Perhaps all three are possible. You hear the sound of reading in the archive. A master recites an old Sumerian line. A student gives its Akkadian explanation. The old words move through the room like distant music. Beautiful and no longer entirely at home, they are not dead. but they live by instruction. Their authority depends on teachers, lists, and careful correction. Ancient sacred language becomes almost a fossil that still breathes. Enki's memory breathes in the same way. As Ea, he can reach wider audiences, enter later epics, and participate in great theological dramas. Yet the listener searching for Enki's departure may notice that a broader presence can hide a more specific absence. The god survives in name and function, while the first intimacy with Eridu, the first mud brick shrine, and the first deep whisper become less visible. The water is still fresh, but its source is harder to locate. That is how rival memories work. Not all rivalry is open conflict. Sometimes one memory becomes official while another becomes local. Sometimes one divine story receives royal patronage while another remains a learned curiosity. Sometimes an older god is honoured precisely by being placed in a subordinate or specialised role. The result is not erasure by hatred, it is erasure by arrangement. Arrangement can be very powerful. A pantheon is like a court. Position matters. Proximity matters. Who speaks first matters. Whose city has conquered whom matters very much. Although the theology usually says it more gracefully, if Enki, now Ea, sits as wise counsellor rather than central sovereign, his importance remains enormous, but his narrative energy changes. He advises the ruling order more than he defines it. You sense it to deep irony here. The god who mastered hidden systems becomes hidden inside a system. His wisdom helps sustain later worlds that no longer revolve around him. He becomes indispensable and secondary at the same time. That is a peculiar fate, and not unknown in human history. The engineer of a palace may be forgotten while the king's statue receives flowers. Charming, naturally. Yet the older current continues. In incantations, Ea's wisdom remains active. He knows formulas, purifications, and ways to combat unseen harm. In myths, he understands consequences before others do. He can still mediate danger. He still belongs to the deep waters. If this is departure, it is incomplete. If this is survival, it is altered. The truth may rest in the tension between those words. You move through different cities in thought. Eridu, Nippur, Babylon, Asher, Amriakapu. Each has its sacred claims, its scribes and its gods, its version of cosmic order. Divine memory migrates among them like a precious object carried through changing courts. Each city receives the old stories and adjusts the lighting. Under one light, Enki appears as primal water wisdom. Under another, Ea appears as skilled counsellor. Under another, the watery lord supports the triumph of a younger power. The god is recognizable, but the scene keeps changing. This matters for the erased script because later tradition may preserve many pieces while losing the arrangement that once made them speak. You can have the name, the symbol, the functions, and even the myths, while still lacking the older pattern in which departure had meaning. A broken vase can keep every shard and still lose the water it once held. The room grows quiet around you. A scribe lifts a tablet and reads an old divine name with perfect care. He is not trying to erase anything. He is preserving what he has been taught. Yet preservation through translation is always a negotiation. One age offers its past to another, and the receiving age answers, yes, but in my words. Enki becomes Ea. The Eridu becomes memory. The deep becomes theology. The helper of humanity becomes learned wisdom in a broader sacred order. None of this is simple disappearance. It is subtler, more human, and perhaps more permanent. A god can be covered not only by dust, but by successful adaptation. You listen to the change name one last time. Ea. It is shorter in the mouth, smooth and ancient. It carries Enki forward, and it carries him away. The sound preserves the god while reminding you that the old world around him has shifted beyond return. Somewhere underneath that later name, the earlier water still moves, but now it must be found through layers of language, empire, and reverent correction. The rival memories do not cancel one another. They gather like sediments in a riverbed. Each layer changes the channel. Each channel guides the water differently, and beneath them all, the hidden current continues, not quite lost, not quite free, moving under names that both reveal and conceal the Lord of the Deep. The city begins to forget itself in silence. Not all at once, not with a single collapse that can be placed neatly inside a scholar's sentence, but by a long retreat from importance. The canals shift, the marshes alter their edges, the great roads of power move elsewhere. A sacred name remains, but the living city beneath it grows thinner. You walk across Eridu when its brightest age has already passed. The air is dry, yet the ground remembers water. Salt crusts lightly in the soil. Broken brick lies underfoot, pale and crumbly, like old bread left for ghosts. The wind moves through hollows where rooms once held heat. Voices, storage jars, and worried families. A lizard crosses a fallen wall with more confidence than most kings deserve. Ruins are rarely dramatic while they are becoming ruins. People leave gradually. A household moves closer to a better canal. A priestly office loses wealth. A storeroom is repaired less often. A courtyard fills with drifting sand. The old temple still has prestige, but prestige does not lift water from a silted channel. Reverence can preserve a name long after daily life has moved on. The mainstream historical fact is that many early Mesopotamian cities rose, declined, revived, and shifted in significance over long periods, often shaped by changing river courses, political centres, and environmental pressures. Archaeologists studying southern Mesopotamia have shown how settlement patterns changed as waterways moved and social power gathered around different cities. A sacred past could remain famous even when local population and influence faded. This is the melancholy of Eridu. It was remembered as primordial, as first, as deeply sacred, yet later political life did not revolve around it forever. Other cities became louder in history. Gained brilliance, Uruk held monumental memory, Nippur became a religious centre of immense importance. Babylon rose into imperial imagination. Eridu remained ancient, but ancient is not always the same as powerful. You feel that difference in the dust. A city can be honoured and neglected at the same time. People may speak its name with respect while investing their wealth elsewhere. They may claim its sacred authority while rarely walking its lanes. They may attach it to myths of origin precisely because it no longer threatens current power. The first city becomes safe once it is no longer the ruling city. That safety is its own kind of braille. Enki's connection to Eridu therefore becomes tender and strange. His city fades from central life, yet his divine reputation continues in wider traditions. The god travels beyond the place that first shaped him. The city remains behind, carrying the older intimacy like an empty cup. It is still lurid, but increasingly remembered from a distance. A quirky fringe tidbit often grows around abandoned sacred places. Some alternative writers imagine Eridu's decline as the result of a divine departure, as though the god physically withdrew and the city withered after losing its hidden source. Mainstream archaeology explains decline through environmental, economic, and political factors rather than a literal divine evacuation. Still, the mythic feeling is understandable. When a sacred city fades, people naturally ask what left first, the people or the Siotu. The scholarly debate remains careful. Some researchers emphasize environmental changes in river systems and marsh conditions as key factors in settlement decline. Others examine political history, trade routes, temple economies, and the shifting prestige of rival urban centres. Another discussion asks how later Mesopotamians remembered ancient cities whose archaeological life no longer matched their mythic importance. That last question matters deeply. A remembered city is not identical to an inhabited one. The remembered Eridu could become more perfect, more primordial, and more symbolic as the real settlement weakened. Distance polishes, ruins remove inconvenience. Nobody has to mention clogged drains, broken walls, quarrelsome neighbours, or temple budgets when describing the first sacred city. Memory edits with excellent manners. You move through a lane where houses have collapsed into low mounds. The thresholds are barely visible. A broken jar lies half buried, its curve catching moonlight. Once it may have held water, oil, beer, or grain. Now it holds dust. Nearby, the remains of a wall lean inward, not from violence, but from exhaustion. Even mud brick eventually gets tired of holding civilization upright. The temple mound still rises. That elevation changes the mood, even in ruin. The sacred place claims the eye. You understand why later visitors might feel that something older than ordinary settlement rested here. The temple's layers beneath the mound are hidden, but the height itself speaks of repeated devotion. Humans raised this place above the plain because they kept returning. Even abandonment cannot fully undo that habit. At sunset, the bricks glow briefly some. The light is copper, then red, then grey. The city seems to breathe once more, as if remembering how it felt to be approached with offerings. You hear imagined footsteps, jars, low chants, and the careful language of priests. Then the sounds fade. The wind resumes its patient scraping. This fading gives the departure mystery a new shape. Perhaps Enki's withdrawal is inseparable from Eridu's transformation into memory. A god tied to a living shrine is encountered through ritual, place, water, and community. A god tied to a remembered shrine is encountered through text, tradition, and imagination. The relationship changes. The deep lord becomes less a presence among reeds and more a figure in learned recollection. That does not make him unreal to the ancient mind. It makes him distant in a different way. Sacred distance can increase authority while reducing intimacy. The first city becomes more revered because it is older, but also less accessible because it is no longer the centre of daily life. Enki's waters become more cosmic, less local. His wisdom becomes grander, perhaps, but less close to the mud on a worker's feet. You pause near an abandoned canal. Its old bed is visible as a shallow depression, silvered by a moonlight. Once, water moved through it with purpose till men cleared silt from its sides, children played at its edge, women drew water, fields depended upon its flow. Now it is dry, except after rare rains. A canal without water is a sentence missing its verb. That image settled going. A city without its living water can still be mapped, excavated, named and honoured. But its motion is gone. If Enki is lord of the hidden fresh waters, then the decline of channels and marsh edges feels symbolically charged. The god's realm has not vanished, yet the city's access to it has changed. The sacred geography no longer functions in the old way. The mainstream evidence remains earthly. River shifts, salinization, changing political networks, and settlement movements shaped the fate of southern Mesopotamian cities. Serious research does not require supernatural explanations, yet myth works through felt relationships, and to ancient memory, environmental change could easily become theological meaning. A drying channel is never only a drying channel when your god lives in water. You enter a ruined room. The floor is uneven. A reed mat may once have covered it, but nothing soft remains. The wall base is cool to the touch. You imagine a family packing to leave. They take tools, jars, textiles, small valuables, perhaps a household charm. They leave broken things behind. They do not say, this city is ending. They say, we're going elsewhere for now. History often begins as an errand. That is how endings hide. No one hears the final, ordinary sentence spoken in a city. No tablet records the last joke in a courtyard, the last complaint about heat, the last cup of water poured from a familiar jar. The abandonment becomes visible only later, when absence has hardened into archaeology. Eridu's forgetting was made of small departures, human and practical, repeated until the sacred city stood mostly in memory. Enki's departure may mirror this. Not one cosmic exit, many small removals, a ritual performed less often, a hymn copied less urgently, canal neglected, a divine name translated, a city bypassed by power, a shrine remembered more than visited. Step by step, the god recedes from lived immediacy into the deep archive of civilization. You feel the sadness of the fallout as without needing to exaggerate it. There is dignity in fading. Not all loss is violent. Some loss is like evening, when every object remains where it is, but light leaves it gradually. Eridu becomes such an evening city. Its sacred reputation lingers like salt on brick, glinting when touched by the right angle of memory. Night fully arrives. The stars appear over the mound. The abandoned canal holds darkness. A dry reed scratches against another reed with a sound like a stylus on clay. Nothing speaks plainly, yet the city that forgot itself continues to teach. It shows how sacred beginnings can survive as ruins, how gods can remain famous while their first homes grow quiet, and how departure sometimes means becoming too ancient to touch. The wind crosses the temple mound, dust lifts, turns and settles again. Eridu sleeps under its own name. Modern hands enter the dust with tools that look almost too small for the task. Brushes, notebooks, cameras, gloves, trays, measuring tapes, and patient eyes move across the remains of a world that never expected to be studied under electric light. The old earth is opened slowly, because haste is one of archaeology's least charming sins. You stand beside the trench. The morning is pale, and the air already carries heat. A worker kneels near a brick line, clearing soil from a surface that has not been exposed for thousands of years. Someone calls out a measurement. Someone else photographs a feature before it changes. The past is not simply found. It is recorded at the moment it returns, because excavation is also destruction when done carelessly. That fact gives the work gravity. Once a layer is removed, it cannot be placed back exactly as it was. A tablet lifted from the ground loses part of its original setting unless that setting has been documented. A wall exposed to air begins a new life of decay. The archaeologist is both rescuer and intruder, which is an awkward job description, but history offers few comfortable ones. The mainstream historical fact is clear. Modern archaeology in Mesopotamia has recovered temples, tablets, seals, pottery, graves, tools, and settlement patterns that transformed understanding of early urban civilization. Universities, museums, and research institutes in the United States, Britain, Iraq, and Europe have all contributed to the study of Sumerian cities and texts. Their work allows ancient myths to be placed beside material evidence, cautiously and fruitfully. You enter a museum storage room in imagination. It is cooler than the desert. Metal shelves hold boxes, fragments, casts, and labelled objects. A tablet rests on foam, its surface crowded with cuneiform signs. Under a lamp, the wedges become small landscapes of shadow. A researcher leans close, not touching the surface, reading what clay has kept. The room smells of paper, dust, and controlled air. It is not romantic, exactly. It is quietly miraculous. Clay tablets are stubborn survivors, but they are not easy witnesses. Their signs may be worn and cracked, burned, or incomplete. Some were excavated under early conditions that failed modern standards. Some entered collections through old market routes, severed from archaeological context. Some remain unpublished. Some have been read, corrected, reread, and debated across generations. The archive is vast, but not simple. Digital methods have changed the work. High-resolution photography, three-dimensional imaging, and online databases now allow scholars to examine tablets in ways earlier readers could not. Faint signs can be seen more clearly. Broken fragments can sometimes be matched. Distant collections can be compared without moving fragile objects across oceans. A student in one country may study a tablet kept in another. The old clay has entered a new kind of water. A flowing network of images and data. A quirky fringed tidbit appears here, wearing modern shoes. Some enthusiasts believe digital restoration will eventually reveal hidden suppressed lines about Enki's departure, as if every missing secret is waiting politely under better lighting. Scholars are more cautious. Imaging can clarify damaged signs, but it cannot restore clay that no longer exists. Technology improves sight. It does not perform resurrection. Annoying but fair. Still, the improvements are real. A sign once thought unreadable may become legible under angled light. A fragment once stored apart may join another piece and complete a sentence. A museum label may be corrected. An old copy may be revised by a sharper photograph. These are small victories, but ancient history is made of small victories. One wedge can change a reading. One reading can alter the mood of a myth. The scholarly debate remains lively. Some researchers emphasize philology, the exact study of language, grammar, and sign forms as the path to recovering ancient meaning. Others stress archaeology, insisting that texts must be understood through buildings, objects, settlement, and environment. Another conversation asks how digital projects may democratize access, while still respecting the cultural heritage of the lands where these objects were found. That last question is important. The tablets and ruins of Sumer belong to the deep history of Iraq, not simply to glass cases in distant capitals. Modern scholarship increasingly recognizes the need to work with local institutions, protect sites from looting, and acknowledge the complicated history by which many objects reached museums. The ancient past is not only ancient, it has modern politics wrapped around it, because apparently even 3,000 years of burial cannot free history from paperwork and argument. You watch a conservator at a table. Her hands are steady. She examines a cracked tablet under magnification. Loose grains of clay must not be lost. A support is prepared. Notes are made. Nothing dramatic happens. And that is the beauty of it. Preservation often looks like restraint. The best hands do not announce themselves. They prevent further loss. In another room, a translator studies a line involving Enki. The sign may be damaged. The grammar is old. A parallel passage helps, but only partly, and the translator writes a possible reading, then marks uncertainty. This humility may frustrate anyone craving a perfect revelation, but it is the only honest way to listen to broken clay. Ancient voices deserve care, not overconfidence. You feel the tension between desire and evidence. The desire is understandable. You want the missing script. You want the line that says Enki departed, where he went, why he left, and what humanity forgot. You want the broken edge to heal itself. You want the God of wisdom to step from the tablet and explain the whole arrangement. But the evidence offers fragments, patterns, parallels, and silences. It asks for patience instead of possession. Patience is a kind of discipline. Modern hands reading dust must accept uncertainty as part of the past, not as a failure. A damaged tablet is not useless because it is incomplete. A ruined temple is not mute because its chants are gone. A broken archive can still reveal scribal habits, divine names, ritual structures, and changes across centuries. The missing parts do not cancel the surviving parts. They make them more fragile and sometimes more luminous. You walk through an excavation house at evening. Tables hold pottery sherds sorted by type. Bags carry labels. A map hangs on the wall, marked with squares and features. Someone drinks tea and looks exhausted in the universal language of fieldwork. Outside, the mound darkens under the sky. The day's discoveries are not yet history. They are notes, photographs, contexts, questions. They must pass through years of study before they become a sentence in a book. That slowness protects the past from fantasy. Yet fantasy remains at the edges, because ancient Mesopotamia invites wonder. Gods of deep water, cities before the flood, kingship descending from heaven, warnings through walls, vessels carrying life. These are not dull materials, they shimmer. The challenge is to let them shimmer without pretending the shimmer is proof of whatever one already wants to believe. You return to the tablet under the lamp. The modern reader is not so different from the ancient scribe. Both depend on careful eyes, trained hands, and inherited methods. Both work within institutions. Both choose how to preserve meaning. The modern scholar may use photography instead of a reed stylus, databases instead of school lists, and climate control instead of a clay shelf. But the task remains familiar. Keep what can be kept. Admit what is gone. Enki's departure, if it lives anywhere now, lives in this tension. It is not confirmed by a complete document. It is not erased by the lack of one. It survives as a question shaped by ruins, changing texts, divine roles, and the emotional pattern of withdrawal. Archaeology does not solve the mystery in a single gesture. It gives the mystery walls, dates, artifacts, languages, and limits. Limits matter. They stop the night from becoming nonsense. The vizim alvepetet dim. A tablet lies still in its drawer, holding signs that outlived empires, storms, and the hands that made them. A researcher closes a notebook. Somewhere, a digital image waits to be enlarged by another reader. Perhaps years from now, perhaps in another language, perhaps with better eyes. The clay keeps its patience. You understand that modern recovery is not conquest. It is listening through damage. It is touching nothing too quickly. It is accepting that some secrets remain secret because the world is old, not because the world is cruel. And in that careful half-light, Enki's hidden waters seem to flow beneath the laboratory table, beneath the museum floor, beneath every attempt to read what time has chosen to leave behind. The dust has entered modern hands. The dust is still speaking. The clues no longer lie in a straight line. They gather like objects placed on a low table in lamplight, each one quiet, each one incomplete, each one asking to be understood beside the others. Water, clay, a pea, a council, a warning, a vessel, a changed name, a ruined shrine, a tablet broken at the edge. You sit before them without forcing them. That is important. Ancient mysteries are easily damaged by impatience. Press too hard, and the evidence becomes a mirror for modern desire. Look too coldly, and the old stories lose their breath. The better path is slower. You let the fragments remain fragments, while listening for the shape they make together. Not certainty, perhaps, but pattern. The first object is water. Fresh water under the earth made life possible in the imagination of Sumer. It fed fields, filled wells, moved through canals, and gave Enki his hidden realm. The mainstream fact remains steady. Southern Mesopotamian civilization depended profoundly on water management, irrigation, and river landscapes. Scholars at major universities have long shown how canals, fields, and settlement growth shaped the earliest cities. Enki's sacred identity fits that world with extraordinary precision. He is not a decorative god standing beside civilization, he is inside its machinery. Water teaches the first lesson. Civilization rests on what it cannot fully see. Beneath the field lies moisture. Beneath the temple lies foundation. Beneath law lies authority. Beneath authority lies belief. Enki belongs to that downward movement, the hidden source that makes visible order possible. His gift is not merely water in a bowl, it is the idea that survival depends on invisible arrangements. The second object is clay. Humanity is shaped from earth softened by water. Tablets are shaped from earth pressed by signs. Bricks are shaped from earth made into walls. Clay becomes body, record, and city. It is humble, but it remembers better than kings. Honestly, clay has outperformed most royal families in the long business of endurance. Clay teaches the second lesson. Creation and memory share material. The same earth that forms a human servant can preserve a divine myth. The same substance that builds a temple can hold the story of its god. Enki, lord of craft and wisdom, stands near all these transformations. He is present wherever raw matter becomes ordered purpose. The third object is Eridu. The city's sacred layers reveal petition, devotion, and burial. Archaeology confirms long sequences of temple rebuilding at that ancient site, connecting material evidence with later traditions that remembered Eridu as deeply primordial. The earlier shrine sleeps beneath later floors, and the god's oldest presence seems to follow the same logic: honoured, covered, preserved, and made harder to reach. Eridu teaches the third lesson. Reverence can bury what it protects. A shrine can be hidden by its own sanctity. A story can be covered by later worship without anyone meaning harm. If Enki's departure became obscure, perhaps it did not vanish through hatred. Perhaps it sank under devotion, like an earlier temple sealed beneath a new floor. The fourth object is the council. Anu, Enlil, Enki, and the wider divine assembly form an architecture of power. Heaven, earth, wind, command, deep water, council. Mesopotamian myth often imagines decisions as matters of divine assembly, where decrees shape the human world below. This is a religious fact, but also a social one. Ancient people understood power as layered, negotiated, and dangerous. The council teaches the fourth lesson. Wisdom is not always sovereign. Enki may be clever, compassionate, and essential, yet he often moves within structures ruled by other powers. His interventions are subtle because he is not simply free. He acts through loopholes, counsel, and indirect speech. A god like this may depart not by being defeated, but by becoming unheard. The fifth object is the warning. A voice speaks through a wall. The detail remains one of the most haunting images in ancient literature. It reveals Enki's character with perfect quietness. He protects human life without openly shattering divine order. He saves through indirection. He turns domestic space into revelation, and a reed wall into a trembling witness. The warning teaches the fifth lesson. Enki's truth often travels sideways. It does not arrive as spectacle. It hides in the ordinary, waiting for the listener who understands. If a memory of his departure existed, perhaps it would also travel sideways, not as proclamation, but as altered ritual, missing line, changed emphasis, or story told under another name. The sixth object is the vessel. The flood boat carries life through a world being erased. It preserves bodies, animals, tools, seeds, and continuity. Ancient flood traditions from Mesopotamia hold this vessel as both practical refuge and symbolic order. Inside it, civilization shrinks into a sealed chamber. Outside it, the old world dissolves. The vessel teaches the sixth lesson. Enki does not prevent every loss. He preserves what can continue. This is not the comfort of total rescue. It is the severe mercy of survival by remnant. His wisdom does not turn catastrophe into fairness. It turns catastrophe into a narrow passage. You pause here, The seventh object is the changed name. Enki becomes known in later traditions through Ie, retaining many qualities while entering a different sacred and political world. This continuity is real, so is the transformation. Language carries the god forward, but also carries him away from the first mud-brick intimacy of Eridu. The old water moves into a wider channel. The name teaches the seventh lesson. Survival can resemble departure. A god may remain famous while no longer being encountered in the same way. The presence continues, but the atmosphere changes. Enki is preserved as wisdom, magic, and counsel. Yet the earliest layer of his meaning may recede under translation and empire. The eighth object is the ruined city. Eridu fades from living centrality while remaining sacred in memory. Environmental change, shifting river systems, settlement movement, and political history all shape such decline. No supernatural explanation is required. Yet mythic feeling arises naturally when a god city becomes a ruin. A sacred place abandoned by people can feel abandoned by heaven. The ruin teaches the eighth lesson. Departure may be geographical, ritual, and emotional at once. When people stop crossing a threshold, the god does not vanish, but the relationship changes. When canals dry or shift, the old water theology becomes memory. When the first city sleeps, its god becomes more ancient than present. The ninth object is the broken tablet. This one is perhaps the most honest of all. It does not pretend to give you everything. It gives you signs, then damage, a name, then absence, a story, then a fracture. Modern scholarship can read much, restore cautiously, and compare widely. But it cannot recover every lost line. The past has limits, and those limits are part cautiously and compare widely. But it cannot recover every lost of the truth. The broken tablet teaches the ninth lesson. Absence is not proof, but neither is it nothing. It shapes what can be known. It creates room for humility. It reminds you that some of history's most important transformations may have left no direct sentence behind, only effects scattered across texts, places, and changing traditions. A quirky fringe tidbit must be handled gently here. Some modern seekers gather these clues into a single dramatic theory, imagining Enki as an advanced being who created humanity, warned selected survivors, then left the earth while priests concealed the record. Mainstream historians do not accept that as established evidence. Yet the emotional pattern explains why the idea persists. The ancient materials truly do contain creation, hidden knowledge, flood survival, divine conflict, and fading presence. The scholarly debate remains more restrained and more valuable. Some researchers interpret Enki primarily within religion and myth. Others emphasize social history, irrigation, temple economy, and political theology. Others study scribal transmission, asking how stories change when copied across languages and centuries. The unresolved question is not whether a forbidden departure tablet has been proven, it is how divine presence transforms when cities, languages, institutions, and memories change. You gather the clues once more. Water says hidden source, clay says formed memory, Eridu says buried beginning, the council says structured power, the warning says secret compassion, the vessel says continuity through loss, the changed name says survival by transformation, the ruin says sacred distance, the broken tablet says humility, and together they do not form a confession. They form an atmosphere. Perhaps that is what Enki left behind. Not a clean farewell, not a map, not an answer that ends the searching. He left a pattern of wisdom moving beneath the official surface. He left the suspicion that civilization is guided as much by hidden mercy as by visible command. He left humanity with water in its clay, numbers in its tablets, fear in its flood stories, and a strange trust in messages that come through walls. The lamp lowers. On the table, the clues remain where they are. None of them speaks alone. Together, They suggest a god who did not vanish from memory, but withdrew into its foundations, a god who became less visible as his gifts became ordinary. Water flowed, clay dried, cities counted grain, scribes copied signs, humans served, survived, rebuilt, and forgot the depth beneath their own cleverness. Perhaps departure is the wrong word. Perhaps Enki became the hidden structure he once revealed. The tablet lies unfinished in the dark. Its surface is smooth on one side and crowded on the other, as if memory itself stopped halfway through breathing. A line begins with confidence, then breaks into damage. Himmel. A divine name may have stood there once. A place may have been named. A movement may have been described. Now there is only clay, edge, shadow, and the patience of things that outlive their makers. You do not lift it quickly. By now, the mystery has changed its nature. It no longer asks for a single missing sentence or one dramatic proof hidden in a sealed chamber. It asks something slower and more difficult. How does a civilization remember what stands beneath it? How does a god of hidden wisdom remain present when his oldest city fades? His language changes, his temple sleeps, and his stories pass through the hands of people with their own loyalties. The answer does not come directly. That is fitting for Enki. Directness was never his favourite instrument. He belongs to wells, counsel, craft, interpretation, and narrow openings inside impossible decrees. His truth moves under floors, through walls, cross translations, and inside the small practical arts by which human beings continue. He is not easily captured by the bright net of certainty. He is more like water under soil. The mainstream historical fact remains grounded. Sumerian civilization left behind cities, temples, administrative records, literary texts, king lists, flood myths, and deep religious traditions preserved through later Mesopotamian scribal culture. Major universities and museums and research projects have studied these materials for generations, revealing a world where myth, labour, power, water, and writing were inseparably joined. The evidence is real, but it is also fragmentary. That combination is the heart of the story. If the record were complete, the mystery might be smaller. If nothing survived, the mystery would be empty. Instead, enough remains to invite you inward, and enough is missing to keep the door from closing. Eridu is real. The temple layers are real. Enki's association with wisdom and fresh water is deeply attested. Flood stories survive, divine councils appear, scribes copied and transformed older traditions, yet the exact meaning of Enki's deepest withdrawal remains suspended. A quirky fringe tidbit still glimmers nearby. Some modern seekers imagine the unfinished tablet as a symbol of forbidden history, believing that Enki physically departed from the human world and that later priesthoods covered the trace. Mainstream scholarship does not confirm such a literal account. Still, the symbol works because the ancient record truly feels interrupted. The clay seems to say, something once continued here. You sit with that feeling. The scholarly debate remains open in honest ways. Some researchers focus on religion, reading Enki as a divine figure shaped by mythic thought and cult practice. Others emphasize environment, seeing his watery identity as inseparable from canals, marshes, and the urgent management of life in southern Mesopotamia. Others study textual transmission, asking how scribes reshaped ancient gods across language, empire, and school tradition. Each approach reveals part of the depth. None drains the water entirely. That is important. A historical explanation does not destroy mystery when the mystery is humanly profound. To say that Enki reflects water management does not make him small. Water management made cities possible. To say that myths changed through scribes does not make them false. Scribes were the vessels through which sacred imagination survived. To say that Eridu declined through environmental and political change does not remove the sadness of a sacred city becoming memory. The ancient world does not need exaggeration to feel strange. It is strange enough that people shaped clay into words and expected those words to carry gods across millennia. It is strange enough that kingship was imagined as descending from heaven. It is strange enough that humanity was fashioned for service, then nearly destroyed for becoming too audible. It is strange enough that wisdom spoke through a wall to save a fragment of life. You breathe slowly. The unfinished tablet seems less like a failed document and more like a mirror of history itself. Human beings always live beside broken edges. You inherit languages with forgotten roots, rituals with lost explanations, cities built over older cities, and stories whose first tellers have become dust. You live by fragments, even when you call them certainty. Ancient Sumer simply lets the fragments show, and perhaps Enki belongs especially to that condition. He is the god who teaches that what matters most may not stand in daylight. Water is hidden before it rises. Wisdom is hidden before it acts. Mercy may be hidden inside a loophole. Survival may be hidden inside a ridiculous boat built under a clear sky. Departure may be hidden inside continuity, so thoroughly that later generations continue using the gift while forgetting the giver. That possibility is wild, but unleaping. What if Enki did not leave by abandoning humanity? What if he left by becoming too deeply woven into human systems to be seen irrigation, craft, ritual purity, incantation, writing, measurement, clever speech, secret counsel, and survival through catastrophe all carry his old atmosphere? Once such gifts become ordinary, the giver becomes invisible. Civilization itself becomes the disguise. You imagine the last line again? A scribe lowers his stylus. The room is dim. Outside, night gathers over the city. The tablet in his hand holds a story older than he can fully explain. Perhaps he copies faithfully. Perhaps he hesitates at a damaged passage. Perhaps the older source is already broken. Perhaps he leaves a gap and continues. A small practical choice becomes a silence lasting thousands of years. No thunder follows. Only the lamp flame moves. Only clay dries. Only the deep water continues beneath foundations no one sees. This is how the oldest mysteries survive. Not as locked doors waiting for a hero, but as ordinary absences inside ordinary preservation. A tablet copied. A line lost. A god renamed. A city abandoned. A myth remembered just enough to ache. The unfinished tablet does not give you an answer. It gives you a posture. It teaches you to listen gently, to resist the hunger for final possession, to let ancient people remain ancient and not become puppets for modern certainty. It lets Enki remain what he has always been in the softest and most difficult sense. Hidden, useful, ambiguous, nearer to the roots than to the crown. You rest your hands beside the clay. The surface no longer feels cold. It has taken warmth from your nearness, as old stories do when they are carried by living attention. The missing line remains missing, yet the silence around it has become full. It holds water, dust, labour, fear, humour, devotion, scholarship, and the long patience of human imagination. Perhaps Enki vanished from histories. Perhaps he moved beneath it. Perhaps those are not opposites. The room darkens. The tablet stays open. Somewhere beyond the wall, the old marsh breathes in its sleep. And perhaps, beneath every erased sign, beneath every forgotten shrine, beneath every city that rises and falls, the story is not yet complete. The night grows softer now, and the sharp edges of the ancient world begin to blur. You no longer need to hold every name. every city, every broken tablet in careful order. Let Eridu settle back into the plain. Let the temple floors rest upon one another in darkness. Let the scribes close their hands, and let the reed stylus lie still beside the lamp. The waters beneath the earth continue without hurry. They move past roots, stones, buried bricks, and the quiet foundations of vanished room. They do not ask to be understood tonight. They only move, patient and cool, carrying reflections of stars that no longer need to be counted. You may leave the archive now. The shelves remain behind you. The clay remains. The unanswered question remains too, but it is no longer heavy. It has become part of the dark, the soul, like distant water heard through sleep. The ancient people return to their work in dreams. Someone pours grain into a jar, someone draws water from a well, someone watches the moon from a roof. Wrapped in a cloak against the night air, their world is gone, yet its softness lingers for a moment longer, and you are safe here, far from the flood far from the broken council, far from the unfinished line. The old mystery can rest beside you without needing to be solved. It can breathe slowly, like a sleeping city beneath sand. So let the tablet close in your mind. Let the waters cover the last reflection. Let Enki remain where hidden wisdom has always lived, below speech, below certainty, below the bright surface of waking thought. The story drifts downward. The night receives it, and now, gently, you may sleep. Good night.